Hi everyone and welcome to Deep Geek Live. Today we are back with a Tolkien live stream. We are looking at the early years of the Tolkien legendarium. We're looking at the creation. We're looking at, for those who know these things, we're looking at the years of the lamps, the years of the trees, all of the foundational stuff. If you are new to Tolkien, do not worry. We're going to take it at a high enough level that hopefully we can bring everyone along with us, trying to set everyone up for in a year's time we get the huge budget Amazon Lord of the Rings series, still untitled Amazon Lord of the Rings series. And I am delighted and honored to have as my guest today what I consider many of us Tolkien content creators consider the OG of the YouTube Tolkien content creators world, Yoisten, Men of the West. Do you want to say hi?
Hey, Robert, thank you so much for having me here. Hey, everyone.
Do you want to let people know where to find you on the internet, what you're about?
Yeah, for sure. So I go by the name Yoisten. I run the channel Men of the West, and we cover just all kinds of Tolkien lore from, Silmarillion through the Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, Unfinished Tales, all the good stuff. And yeah, so my YouTube channel is Men of the West. Please check it out if you're interested. And again, Robert, thank you so much for having me. It's good to talk to you all, speak to a new audience here.
Absolutely. Well, as I say, it's an absolute delight to have you on, and I put a link down in the description if you are interested. Reflective rambling, just to start off with. No, there's no picture of Ungoliant behind me today, like I threatened last time. We will come to this picture later, but this is the only picture we have so far, the pre-released picture of the Lord of the Rings TV show, and we will definitely come to this in a little bit. But what I will do just to start with, and Yoisten, perhaps if after I give my 2-minute overview of the beginning bit of what we're going to talk about, if you could perhaps chime in and add a little bit of extra flavor, that would be really appreciated.
Absolutely.
So what we are looking at is the beginning of Middle Earth, or Arda, which is probably what we should talk about. Middle Earth technically is more sort of the continent that we have when we're talking about things from the Lord of the Rings, the Hobbit. That's the continent we've got there. Arda is more like the world. So we're talking about the creation. We're talking about the beginnings of this. And the beginning of this is with the Eru Ilúvatar, who is the one god of Tolkien's world. And I'll sort of kick off with Amara Lee. Thank you so much. I saw your super chat. I'll read it out in just 1 second, but I just want to get to your question, which is, what is the music of the Ainur? And this is fundamentally what the creation is all about, because Eru of Ilúvatar had expressions of his thought, which are called the Ainur. And these are these great spiritual beings. We'll hear more about them as they go on. And these sung. They were conducted by Eru Ilúvatar himself. They each had kind of expressions, bits of understanding of his character, and they sung into creation the world, the universe as we know it. Now, there was a discordant note which came from Melkor. Much more about him, but he's the big baddie. But they tried, and then Melkor interrupted. They tried again, Melkor interrupted again, and then a third time it happened. Then Eru Ilúvatar basically said, right, that's it, that's enough. This is what has been created. And then he showed all of the Ainur, these spiritual beings, what he created, and some of them went, wow, and well, all of them went, wow, and he said, do you want to go down? If you want to go down, you've got to look after this place. So some of them go down there, and that is Arda, that is the created world. But they found out, although they'd been sort of shown this huge song of creation going through time, they'd actually been dropped in at the beginning. So what their role was to manage to rule this land. And so we then get, at the very beginning, we get Melkor, who took with him he corrupted a whole load of these Ainur and brought them down with him up against what are called the Valar, 14 of these Ainur, the mighty Ainur, supported by Maiar, a sort of a lower level. And then we get this cosmic struggle between these two different groups. And out of that, you get this world that we have. There's lots of toing and froing. We'll get to the years of the the trees, I think, in a moment. But first of all, what they did was they thought, why not create stuff? We need some light. We'll create some lamps. And so that's the beginning bit of what we got. Now, I've skated over a huge amount of detail there. Yoyston, why don't you just sort of pick out a few little details for us to chew over to start with?
Yeah, so that was a really good, like, high-level summary of all of that. That was really quite concise. So I revisited this section in preparation for today. Just read through the Ungoliant the past couple days. And it's really fascinating how, if you view this through that somewhat Christian lens that Tolkien came at it with, this creation story, and almost compare that with Genesis, and you see some of the comparisons between, to start with, Iluvatar and the Christian God. And the interesting thing with Iluvatar is right off the bat, when he is speaking to Melkor, he answers one of the philosophical questions that has plagued our world for millennia, and it's the question of evil, right? And the question of an all good. How can an all powerful being be all good? In the Silmarillion, it is said that when he is talking to Melkor, nothing that Melkor can do does not have its uttermost source within Iluvatar and Iluvatar himself, because in the beginning he was alone, and then Eru created the Ainur because of his thought. He created them through his thinking, and then they created Ea and the world through their music. And it's interesting that all things that happen in Middle-earth, when you start with that frame on everything in Tolkien's works, everything that happens in Middle-earth is part of the one, is part of Eru Iluvatar, even Melkor and Melkor's evil himself. So yeah, if we wanted to start there, I feel like that is a really interesting tidbit.
I absolutely agree. And I think one of the fascinating things about Melkor is the most powerful of all of these first created beings. Mm-hmm. And he is also the one who has the greatest breadth of knowledge and understanding and expertise and brilliance and all of it. The Ainur that we know about, all of them, Manwë's a slightly different exception. He was sort of treated sort of like a brother to Melkor, but the others, they have specialities. They have an understanding and expression of an aspect of Iluvatar, whereas Melkor he had it all. Mm-hmm. He's not an equal to Iluvatar by any stretch of the imagination, but he did have this kind of like broader understanding of the universe.
Mm-hmm. And that's a really good point. The one mentioned directly after Melkor is actually one I'm making my next video on, is Ulmo. And Ulmo is fascinating because, as you said, these different Valar take on different aspects. And Ulmo's aspect is that of the sea and the waters and everything. And the interesting thing with him is that of all of the aspects, of all of the elements, music holds the most amount of the music still today. And I think that speaks to Tolkien's love of the ocean, the sounds of the sea, and how that plays into that being kind of an echo of this very music. And you're right, with Melkor being as powerful as he is, it's because he did things that some of the others amongst the Ainur would never have dreamed of doing. He explored the dark parts of the universe before there was even a world, before there was even a Middle Earth or an Arda. He explored the dark pieces and tried to figure out what it would take to build his own creations, like Eru building the Ainur. And so it's interesting that Melkor, who becomes the great enemy of the world and of the powers of the Valar and of the free peoples, he actually kind of was in mockery wanting to be like Iluvatar himself. He wanted to have his own creations. He wanted to shield his people as he saw fit. He wanted to be their overlord, and he just wanted to be a kind of tyrant, whereas Eru wanted them to have free will.
Yeah, and I think this is fascinating from Tolkien, because Melkor is not just set up as this hateful baddie. We have to, everything about him is wrong. Part of us actually goes, we kind of like that independence. I think that actually appeals to us in a certain sense. We kind of like that everybody's doing what they're supposed to do, and he's the one who like goes off and explores a few random other things and thinks, well, you know what, I might want to do it my way. And that does kind of appeal. That doesn't make him a good guy, but it does. It means that he's not just this kind of stereotypical baddie.
Absolutely.
And to add another layer to it, it's when we do get all of this singing at the beginning, and Melkor adds in this discordant. That's the phrase, or discord is the phrase that the word that Tolkien used. So he's sort of like clanging and different, and it doesn't quite work. And we're expected to think, oh, this is ruining everything. That's the feeling that we're supposed to get from it.
Yeah.
But actually, Eru Ilúvatar sort of summarizes it all and says, and this is going to really annoy you, but those bits actually are going to be part of the bigger pattern, and they're going to lead to even greater wondrous stuff. So the bad things, the discordant notes, actually are part of the amazing things that happen. And it's looking through at high levels of this history, it's actually fascinating when you see, oh, maybe actually what Melkor was doing there in real history, this is a discordant note that turns into something even better.
Absolutely. That's a great way of putting it. And again, it all ties back to that everything has its source within Eru himself, the good and the bad, even those discords and those that lack of harmony. They all have that foundation within Eru. So he can create something beautiful. He can create the Manways and the Vardas and the Olmos, but he can also create the Melkors and the Saurons and the Balrogs and the Ungoliants. It's really fascinating because it's all a part of the one.
Absolutely. A couple of super chats. Ross Swan, thank you so much, saying, I have no question, just like the channel. Thank you so much. And Aaron Streva saying, hello, Men of the West and Robert. Hope you're both doing good. Favorite Valar and Maiar? I'll happily answer this one for myself quickly. I'd love to hear from you as well, Yoyston. You mentioned him a couple of times already. For me, my favorite Valar is Ulmo by a very long stretch, because the rest of the Valar, I get a bit disappointed in them in the long run. Oh, yeah. Sure, they're great, but they do kind of abandon, particularly humanity. They just kind of like leave them alone a lot. Whereas Ulmo, it said he never forsake the children of Ilúvatar, even when the other Valar did. So for me, he's the one who actually kept to what he was supposed to be doing and actually cared for people. So that's that. In terms of the Maiar, so the Maiar, just in case you're still a little bit confused about this, forget about the Ainur to start with. The Ainur is the big overarching title for all of these spiritual beings. When they came down to Arda, Middle-earth, they then broke down into two different ranks. The Valar are the top, and then the Maiar are the sort of the supporting cast. They're still very spiritual and powerful and all the rest of it, but they're not the big beasts at the top. So they are. We know quite a few of them actually. So all of the Astari, so Gandalf and Saruman and Radagast, also Sauron. These are all Maiar. There's a couple of others that appear in the story as they come along. For me, I've always had a soft spot for Radagast. Just I mean, I don't know. Maybe it was Sylvester McCoy in the Hobbit movies who just absolutely caught it. But I just thought, he's just living his best life. So fair play to him. But what about you? Do you have a favorite?
So in terms of the Valar, I always say it like it's a staple of my channel at this point. I feel like I always say Tolkien for how strong he is and how the moment he comes down onto Earth, Melkor's afraid of him and everything. And I love that. I love all the memes that surround him. However, in a more serious and character and story driven aspect, I think it's got to be Ulmo. It has to be, right? And again, making this video about him today that I'm going to release in a couple days from now, it just really definitely solidified that. Like you said, he would never abandon the free peoples. He even stayed away from the politics of the Valar. He was like, oh, I'll go to the councils that are important for the greater fate of the world, but I'm going to be in my own realm. I'm going to be tending to the earth, as we'll get to later during the right after the Years of the Lamps, but right before the Two Trees, or even during the Two Trees, when the earth was under Melkor's shadow. It was Ulmo alone whose waters made sure that the earth didn't die. And I think that's just such a beautiful thing. He never gave up on it, and he did more than the other Valar really ever could. So in a very serious way, I would say him, although I love my Tolkas. And as for the Maiar, Aloran for me, Gandalf has to be my favorite of all of the Maiar. And it's because he understands a couple fundamental things that other Maiar tend to forget about. He understands mercy, and he understands wisdom in a way that others like Kuromo or Saruman and Sauron tend to forget these things. And just like Ulmo, nothing, like the Free Peoples could do nothing to make Gandalf give up on them. He was always there for them and gave his life almost twice for them. And that's something that's quite beautiful, even though he also kind of stayed away from, he didn't seek power. He didn't seek acknowledgement like Saruman did. But he remembered his task. And I think for that, he's got to be my favorite.
Yeah. I mean, Gandalf clearly, but it's, in terms of doing the job that they were sent to do, he has to be up there. Mara Lee, thank you so much, saying in honor of both Frodo and Bilbo Baggins, whose birthdays are coming up this month on the 22nd, just a show of immense love, appreciation, and support for all the fabulous videos and stories on both your channels. Thank you, Robert. Well, thank you, Mara. I've got a couple of other questions from you coming up, but I'm going to use this as an opportunity to give a big plug to the 22nd. You talk about those of us who are Tolkien nerds call the 22nd of September Hobbit Day. This is the day of Bilbo and Frodo's birthday, and we just like to celebrate and have fun, and the way that Tolkien YouTubers celebrate and have fun is by making videos. So we're gonna exactly we set up a playlist. So next Wednesday, do check that out. I'm on there. I'm pretty sure you're also making a video for it, Yoyston.
Yep.
And all of your other favorite YouTubers who do Tolkien stuff, and a few you've probably never heard of. I would highly recommend that you go out there, you check out particularly those people you've not heard of, and look at their videos. So that's next Wednesday. So thank you, Maura, for giving me the opportunity to talk about that quickly. Lyle Hammock, thank you so much for the super chat. I'll answer yours a little bit later in the stream, if that's okay, just to sort of help the flow of this. Aaron Strever saying, I have a question. Why is it in every fantasy that in the very early age, it is treated as the best first age? So the first age for the Lord of the Rings, the Age of Heroes for the Game of Thrones, for example. So why is it that in fantasy then sort of things are better the earlier they are? I mean, I think this is a really, it's an interesting one, as I say. I know, I mean, actually, I don't know, Yoyston, whether you're much of a Game of Thrones person at all. Are you?
Yeah. I follow Game of Thrones quite a bit, less so in the past year since season 8. But no, I love Game of Thrones.
Yeah, fantastic. In that case, I will happily throw this one to you in a moment as well. So in sort of the world of A Song of Ice and Fire, it's not so much that things were seen as like the golden age back then, I don't think. But it was the Age of Heroes, that there were specific people who did specifically heroic things. What is fascinating there, I think, is how there was clearly some technology or magic or something which was greater then than now. So you get things like the Wall, you get things like Storm's End, the Five Forts that existed and people simply do not know how they were created. And that, I think, is the feel which is carried across into Lord of the Rings. It was probably the other way around, to be honest. But you get the magic was greater and stronger earlier on, and you see this kind of flow out over time. And this is at least partly, in my view, because the way, and Tolkien, he at least started out thinking this, and he sort of slightly nuanced this through his life. But Middle-earth is sort of our world, but in his expression, in a different stage of imagination. So it's not like an earlier time, but a different stage of imagination. So as you move more towards us, and where we are now, then magic slowly kind of like dampens down, and that's the same kind of feel you get across a lot of fantasy worlds, in my view. But have you got a take on this at all, Houston?
Yeah, I think it comes from it plays into fantasy because it comes from this fundamental element of being human. I think of this nostalgia that everyone feels for when they were younger, when the world was older, when things were simpler. Right, the first time you saw the ocean, the first time you climbed a tree, that you saw the mountains, that those times were much better than the 50th time that you did those things. And so I think Tolkien and a lot of other fantasy authors, they play into those elements. It's like the first time Beren met Luthien in the forest of Doriath and under the stars, and how just romantic that scene is, because that's the first time in history something like that has happened. And so I think it plays into the olden times being, like you say, the times of more magic, the times of heroes, because we tend as people to remember the incredible good overcoming and vanquishing the incredible evil within our own history. So, we remember the Barons and the Luthiens and the Tours and the Turins overcoming the Morgoths and the Saurons. And and then as time passes, we idolize and romanticize those moments more. And then in fantasy, it's usually because those moments are closer to the beginning of their respective worlds. The gods are more at play, they're more active, versus 10,000 years later when they're like, the world will keep spinning, they're fine. And then they don't do as much. So I think it's all of those aspects a bit combined, but I think the fundamental element at play is that nostalgia.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I just spotted Girl Next Gondor in the chat. Hi there. Fantastic channel. I'm pretty sure that she'll be doing something for Hobbit Day as well. Saying no love for Melian. There'd be no Luthien without her. As don't get me started on Melian. That's not for this stream. There'll be maybe more of a first stage stream, but I have thoughts. Tobias Gulka saying, is there any connection between Tom Bombadil and the origin story? This is fascinating. I think this is one of those ones I'm going to throw. I've got questions on Tom Bombadil a bit later, which we will pick up again. But I just, Yoyston, why don't you start on this one? I love the character of Tom. We all love the character of Tom Bombadil. Yeah. So where does he fit in creation, do you think?
There's a feasible argument out there that I've heard that Tom Bombadil is the physical embodiment of Iluvatar himself. Now, I don't know if I would go that far, but it has to do with that music element. And that was a good catch on that super chat's behalf, is because it's no accident that he has the most immense power out of anyone Frodo ever encounters, but he also is singing all the time. He's filled with music, and he even marries the river daughter. And going back to the whole music being in water thing, that makes sense. There are all these aspects of music that connect to Tom. And so it's definitely likely that he is this being of complete, I've also heard an argument that he is the music of the Ainur personified, or he's some sort of offshoot of that. Like after the music happened, he was just kind of an unintended side effect of that music. And he just came into creation through that. A bunch of different arguments, but it's no accident, I'll say, that he sings a lot, that he's so connected with music.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those of you not hugely aware of Tom Bombadil, he's a character in the books, not in the films. I completely understand. I know there were a lot of purists who were very disappointed he wasn't in the movies. I personally completely understand, because he is completely. I don't even know how to say it. He doesn't seem to fit. He's just this. You get the hobbits going through these horrible adventures, being chased down by the Black Riders, and then suddenly this crazy person in brightly colored clothes singing silly songs comes along. Seemingly, we get told that the ring is this amazing thing of power, and then he flicks it around, puts it on his finger, makes it disappear and reappear. I mean, he just does not make sense on a first reading. But anyway, yes, the song is there. For me and my money, I think that it's not that he's Iluvatar himself, but I think that he is what is captured of the song within Middle Earth, and that for me is how it works. Is that he is the expression of being rather than doing. He just is. That's what he is. He's not there to try and do stuff in the world. He just it's not that he wishes to exist. He just does exist and enjoys existence. So that's where I put him.
Yeah, I really like that.
Awesome, good. I love it when you agree with me, because that makes me feel very clever. Grant D. Fairley, thank you for the super chat. I didn't see a question attached to that one. Hopefully one of the moderators will pick it up if you just drop it into the chat. Nate Ash saying, really enjoying your Tolkien profiles. Thank you and well done. Well, thank you very much for that. Let's go to a question from Halland's little sister. So this saying, I'm thrilled about your Lord of the Rings discussions. I know very little about this world and I'm keen to understand it with your help. This might be a very basic question, but are the elves gods? Were the elves descendants of the creators of this world? Who or what are they? And I think I just wanted to do this one quite early on, just to say there are no basic or stupid questions in this. I'm fully aware of the fact that there's a lot of people coming into Tolkien who either haven't read the Silmarillion or have read it a long time ago and have forgotten a lot of it, or have read it and found it a little bit hard going.
Absolutely.
So do not worry. There are no stupid questions here. I'm very happy to answer whatever question you've got going. So the short answer is that when I was skating over the high level of creation, I think I mentioned the children of Iluvatar at some point in there. This is basically this was a surprise to the Ainur. They didn't really know this was what was going on, but Eru Iluvatar said, aha, and then there's these two races, these two peoples who are my children, the children of Iluvatar, and they are what we know as elves and humans. And so elves are the firstborn, and then humans are the secondborn, by which that means that the elves awoke and appeared in Middle-earth first, the humans appeared sometime later. Now, so the elves are not they're not gods, they're not part of the Ainur, they're kind of the spiritual beings, but because they are this kind of firstborn, and because they also then get kind of, or a lot of them get gathered in by the Valar and say, hey, come and live with us and enjoy all of our goodness and wonderfulness. They do take a degree of that sort of, by a process of sort of osmosis, they take on a lot of this kind of creation goodness and a Iluvatarish goodness, which is probably a very vague way of expressing it. I'm sure Joysten will come up with a better way of saying it. But they are indeed immortal within Middle-earth, but that does not make them gods. Do you want to give us an extra bit levels of nuance or detail on there? Whatever works.
I think, I mean, they're the first children of Iluvatar, and you provided a really good summary there. The thing that I would really add is that more so than us humans are, they are bound to this world. They're bound to the circles of the world. So, in a sense, they are completely immortal, because even if they die from an arrow, to the chest or whatever it is, they still can't. They're still bound to Arda. They can't escape the world. They go to the halls of Mandos, and then eventually they are re-embodied. And whereas humans, we go to the halls of Mandos to await our journey to the next place, of which Manwë does not even understand. We go there and then we leave the circles of the world forever. And in that case, that's one of the biggest differences in terms of the dooms, the fates that await either race. Elves are part of Arda more so than humans are, because we're going to go beyond. And I think the Tolkien implication there is that humans go to the halls of Eru in the end, the halls of Iluvatar. I imagine that's probably where they go, versus staying in Arda. And yeah, I mean, I think when you're reading it, that element of nostalgia also kicks in with the elves, because it's a good way to look at them as our older siblings, I guess. I think that's a really interesting way. Our older siblings that we'll never see again, that have disappeared from the world, but that we have stories about. And I tried to find the quote. I think it's in either Morgoth's Ring or the Peoples of Middle Earth, some one of the obscure books of the history of Middle Earth saga. And I think it says, if in today's world a person chanced to see an elf, they wouldn't understand or know how to behold the beauty that is in front of them with one of the elder kind. And it's really, I think that's a fascinating way to see them, as an older sibling, or our older siblings that have passed from this world, but are still within the world. Just we'll never see them again.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where they have this kind of ethereal quality. And I think this is one of the things they did really well, actually, in the films, the movies. The elves had this kind of ethereal quality. I mean, part of it was probably Kate Blanchett, who was ethereal at the best of times or the worst of times. But it's just like they had this feeling of almost like spiritual beings. That, I think, is what Tolkien would have appreciated, because they are so long-lived, they are tied to all of this, and they have the wisdom of the ages. And also, for someone like Galadriel, having been born in Valinor in the light of the trees, we'll get onto the trees in just a moment, she is supposed to be luminous in that kind of way. Lyle Hammack, thank you so much, saying, what is your view on Foresight in Lord of the Rings? I view it as remnants of the music which characters like Gandalf and Melian as Maiar were able to remember. Thank you for your content. Well, thank you very much. And this is something, at some point I'm going to do a video on this, because I find this a fascinating subject. But at a high level, what we have, lots of characters in the Lord of the Rings have this kind of foresight is probably the best way of saying it, but some characters do say it more than others. So Gandalf will sort of mutters dark things about thinking, and I'm sure that Gollum has a part to play, for good or ill, and before the end, and it's like, where's that come from? You seem to know something about this. Ditto, Elrond sort of says, I foresee that this part was set aside for you, Frodo, and again he seems to have some kind of foresight about what's going on. And at a lesser level, you also find a whole load of if you ever want something to, if you're ever bored, go through the Lord of the Rings. The amount of times someone says, I feel in my heart that, almost all the time, that's going to be true. I feel in my heart that I will not survive this battle. They're going to die. I feel in my heart. So there's a lot of characters. So there seem to be various levels to this. And Joysten, I'd love your thought on where these kind of levels fit in. I will do the top level of this, which I think is what you're talking about, Lyle, when you're talking about Gandalf and Melian. Gandalf and Melian are both Maiar, which means that they were there. They were part of the Ainur. They were part of the people who were singing this song. They were there at creation. Now, the detail of what seems to have happened was that they were singing this song, and it was just, they were creating beautiful music. Then Eru Ilúvatar kind of showed them, and this is what you've been creating. And they went, wow. And he showed them, like, beginning to end, what it was. But he didn't explain everything that was going on. He just sort of explained a few of the sort of the highlights. And then he dropped them in at the beginning of the story. So all of the Ainur, to some extent, although they may have forgotten some of it, although some of it will be things that Eru Ilúvatar hasn't explained, and certainly towards the end that there were lots of things that he hadn't explained, there is this, as you say, this kind of memory of the outlines of things. So I think this is the easiest bit to explain. I'm going to leave the harder bits to Joysten. But so you get characters like Gandalf and Melian, who is another one of these Maiar, who were there. And so they saw this, and so they have some sort of echo in their hearts of what happened. Joysten, do you want to pick up on either that, or I rather unfairly left you with what I thought were the harder ones? But what do you think about this idea of foresight across the piece?
It's such a fascinating question, because it invokes a philosophical issue of determinism versus free will, and it's one I grapple with a lot in Tolkien's works, especially how much did Ilúvatar know, how much did he leave subject to free will. And I know in the new Nature of Middle-earth book, there's a part about greater free wills, smaller free wills, like moments in which determinism kind of overcomes free will and vice versa. But I would say Foresight, I've actually never heard that idea before, where it's them remembering back to the vision they saw in the music. And I really like that. But other characters like Elrond has a lot of foresight, which I think is in part enhanced by his ring, Vilya. Mm-hmm. And he wasn't one of the Ainur. So with his foresight, there's got to be some different source. I think it's some measure of really just like wisdom. It's a way to mark when a character is wise, is give them that ability of foresight, or I've seen so much that I can kind of infer that this will happen this way. But it is really hard because some characters are also more attached to dooms and determinism than other characters are. So Turin, I always argue, is somewhat of a fated doom-mastered character, and a lot of what happens isn't his fault, because his entire life he was under a curse, or pretty much for his entire life he was under a curse. So it's kind of easier to give foresight, or to have foresight about Turin, because you know that he's under this curse. Same with the Sons of Feanor and their oath. But with other characters, right? You mentioned the Gollum one, Robert, with Gandalf saying, in my heart, Gollum has some role to play in this. I have a feeling that plays into the wisdom of the character of Gandalf and his understanding of the plan of Eru, of perhaps how the strings of the world come together to make the greater weave, right? The weaving of the story. It's a really complex answer, and I don't know how much of what I covered, but that's kind of how I see it. It's a constant struggle between free will and determinism.
Well, I mean, I think you said it very eloquently, I have to say. And there's also an element, I think the last bit of this pattern that I'll pick up before we move on, is that Melian in particular, it's sort of noticeable that there is she marries into the children of Ilúvatar effectively. So you get there are part Maiar. Yes, it's very diluted, but you can sort of chart down the family trees of where this sort of ends up, and so you get someone like Aragorn, for example, and as one of the Númenóreans, he's part elf, but also then you can sort of go even further back. So there is this wisdom and knowledge is dripping out throughout huge amounts of characters that we probably don't necessarily think of as being anything more than just normal men. I did notice, actually, while we're here, I spotted a couple of other luminaries in the chat. The Clueless Fangirl was, I think she's gone now. Clueless Fangirl was here, pressing her case as ever that the best the best of the Ainur is Melkor, and Sauron is the best of the Maiar. Let's not go there. I think that says more about her than she probably thinks. Also, I think I saw Nerd of the Rings in the chat as well. Hi there, Matt. Great to see you. Both of them, I think, are also going to be doing videos for the Hobbit Day next Wednesday. So please do go and check out both of their channels. As I say, we're sharing the love today. We're trying to make sure that everybody can see as many different of these fantastic Tolkien content creators as possible. Fantastic question. Reflective Rambling, thank you. Picking up for Keegan Nakano saying, did Morgoth ever have a chance of winning? Or is it more of a God and Lucifer situation where it was always fated that he would fail? Well, I mean, I'll give the sort of the headline here is that, yeah, it's more of a God and Lucifer situation. It's not exactly the same, but Morgoth is the created, Melkor is the created being, whereas Ilúvatar is the overarching god of all of this. So it's not a fair fight. But the battle that was in balance was the battle between Melkor and all of his lackeys, because when he sort of broke away, he sort of tempted a whole load of come with me, all the other Ainur, we do not know how many. And then there was a limited number of the Ainur who went off to create and look after Arda. And they had a struggle that we're told went on for ages. before your guy Tulkas arrived, of course.
Oh yeah.
So do you want to? What's your take? Could Morgoth have won?
I think in Just Against the Free Peoples, if the Valar and the Maiar hadn't interfered, he would have just conquered Middle Earth. And if the Valar didn't care about the children, if Ulmo didn't care about the children, he would have just ruled Middle Earth while they ruled in Valinor, and Eru would have been quite disappointed in his Arda, I believe. But it's as you say, it's God versus Lucifer. I don't think that was ever going to truly happen. I don't know what the Valar were exactly waiting for. I don't know why they let the free people suffer on for 500 years like they did, but you'll get into that in your first stage live stream. But even in the earlier ages with the Years of the Lamps, like I don't know why they didn't oppose Melkor. They kind of left him to gather his strength. So the Valar, if they had been more, I guess, on top of things, they could have dealt with him faster. I'm not exactly sure why they didn't. Maybe it was because he was more powerful than any single one of them combined. Maybe it was that he had his own role to play, that Foresight moment again. So I don't know. It's but on an individual scale, if the Valar and the Maiar hadn't gotten involved in the Silmarillion, that would have been it for elves and men.
Yeah, absolutely. So Morgoth could have wiped the floor with Middle Earth, I think is the short answer, but not against the ultimate authority in this world. Lar Hamak saying, Ulmo, the greatest of the elves to Valinor. What would have happened if the Valar had listened to him? So why don't we just we'll take the timeline forward a little bit. I've got a couple more questions we might dot back in a moment, but just to answer this, we'll take the timeline forward a bit. Where we left this was that all of the Ainur had come down, and we have this big struggle between Morgoth and the Valar, and as we say, this first struggle was ended when Tulkas arrived, and he's quite a badass and basically pushed back Morgoth, and then the Valar set to making Middle Earth, making Arda, which at the time was a disc, not a globe, disc, and they thought we need lights, so they created these two lamps. Just basically on top, big lamps on top of big hills, and this was what was known as the Years of the Lamps. And then we get Morgoth, who'd been just sort of hiding away, biding his time, suddenly comes out and just kicks over the lamps, and the lamps splatter everywhere and destroy all of this creation that they've been doing. And the Valar go, huh? And then run away, which is one of the many things on the charge sheet of this kind of derogation of duty. But they go off and sort of put themselves in this new little continent, effectively, Aman, hide behind some big mountains that they create, and they sort of dip back in to Middle Earth because they knew that the elves were going to be created at some point, and they were supposed to be looking after the elves. So this carries it again, unknown period of time. We'll come to, I've got a question about the time periods, which we'll come to in just a second. But we over this period, then at some point, the elves, actually I'm getting ahead of myself here with the elves being created, but they clearly need light, the Valar, so they then create two trees. This is then the Years of the Trees, because the lamps have been destroyed, they now create the trees. These are over on their continent, and there's the stars there, and they create new and shinier stars, and it's underneath these stars that the elves wake up. Morgoth gets there first, tempts away a few, but then the Valar discover the elves and say, okay, we need to protect you guys. Another big battle, getting rid of Morgoth, but they then try and get the elves over, and Ulmo does not think that this is a good idea. Ulmo thinks that the elves should stay in Middle-earth. This is where they wanted to stay, but the rest of the Valar basically kind of, I mean, coerced is probably too strong a word at this stage. They did They did to go a bit further a bit later, but they kind of like got a few people over, showed them the sites, and said, "Hey, this is good. Go back, tell your people, and come over." So, but Ulmo thought they should just be left there. Again, skating over huge amounts of history. But the question is, what would have happened if the Valar had just said, "Actually, you know what? The elves can stay there."
Ooh, all right. That is really interesting. If the elves could stay there, so it was said that Melkor was going to be imprisoned for 3 ages, and Valian years, so the years before the sun and the moon. It's an odd calculation because they were longer than our years are now. There's a calculation given, and we can go through that in a bit when we get to that question. But ultimately, so with those 3 ages, a bit of an undisclosed amount of time, Melkor is going to stay imprisoned. Now, I imagine... So I imagine in the Years of the Lamps, Sauron transitioned his allegiance from Aule the Smith to Melkor, because by the time Melkor was captured during the Years of the Trees, Sauron was already in Angband, and he was just waiting. So if the elves had stayed in Middle-earth, that would have been their only threat. But that's it, their only threat. And perhaps the Balrogs that remained at Atumno, I suppose. If that would have happened, I imagine Ulmo would have wanted to look after them more. I think he wanted to give them more space, more freedom, have them heal Middle-earth from the darkness that Morgoth had given it. But he would have said, okay, there's another being, this Maya, and all of these other Maya are the Balrogs that we're going to have to deal with. Now, I imagine maybe the Valar would have helped the elves at that point, because even against just Sauron and the Balrogs, I don't know if those early elves could have taken them. So yeah, it's a really fascinating question. I think they would have had greater protection, but they still would have had other threats to deal with.
I agree. So just getting rid of Morgoth didn't get rid of all of the challenges. There were a huge amount of Morgoth's baddies just hiding out deep underground, just ready to jump back up again when he re-emerged. So I think this really was a matter of whether or not the Valar would have proactively gone out there and protected them and guided them, or just stayed over a man. So I think that's the big issue. Having the Valar around was what was necessary for them. Estelle, just random question, asking what my favorite British composer is. Rutter or Elgar would be where I'd go. Jules Holman, how old is Middle-earth? Is it billions of years like our own Earth? You picked up on this one already, Yoyston, so I'm tempted to let you go. It's a question that doesn't have an easy answer again, so I shouldn't immediately just throw it over to you. But the Tolkien did a few times kind of like give us approximations with a few little calculations. But he did shift his mind on this a little bit through this period of creation. And this is probably actually a moment to just take a step back and say, for those who are new to Tolkien, you often think of, when you look at Lord of the Rings, the Silmarillion, as this great unchanging behemoth of wonderful creation, which it is. But this was a life's work for Tolkien, and he shifted his mind about various things over the course of decades. Now, most of them are quite minor, like how many Balrogs were there. Some of them are like a little bit more sort of, where on earth was Galadriel for a few thousand years, which is quite a significant question in many ways. But there's one of the things that he seems to shift his mind on is the exact timings. And indeed, we get a lot of his thoughts from Christopher Tolkien, his son, who was basically the editor afterwards, gathered together all of his notes, which was a combination of like proper longhand writing and erudite prose and just random scribbles in corners of exam sheets. And when you get into it, there's a huge amount of him saying, I can't really read all of this, but I think it said, which doesn't actually help all that much. And one of them, when he's adding up all of these years, he does seem to make a mathematical error, which is quite amusing. But in any event, what's your take on how old Middle-earth or Arda is?
So as you're giving the summary, I was able to gather as much as I could and kind of calculate the full time span here. So it's said that the Valiant years, the years before the sun and the moon, the calculation, and like you said, there's a bit of mathematical problems here, but the number we're given is one Valiant year equals 9.582 of our years. So I went ahead, and there are about 5,000 Valiant years. So I went ahead and did that conversion there, and then went through and I've got all of the other ages added up. So the Valiant years, there apparently that was in our years length. That was 47,910, and then the first age was 590 years, and then the second age was 3,441. The third age, 3,021, and then I'm going to right when Eldarion, the son of Aragorn, passed away. It said that was 220 of the fourth age. So by that time, in the last known record of a timeline that we have, and a lot of these dates are from the Tolkien Gateway, by the way, to shout them out. I've got here 55,182 years, and that's partway through the fourth age. That's about how long the world was in our years.
Yeah, well, I hope everyone is as impressed as I am by the instant maths.
Thanks. It's fascinating because, I mean, if you look at our world, it's billions of years old. But for everything that has happened in Middle Earth, it's 55,000 years.
Yeah, and that seems to be the sort of the consensus for all the different types that he's done. I mean, he initially came up with something which was like 6,000 years or something like that.
Yeah,
but then sort of like over time figured out, a consensus of 50-odd thousand years. So thank you for that. Reflective Rambling saying... Grant D. Fairley super chat. Did I miss one? Apologies. Which gives me the opportunity. Moderators, you do a fantastic job. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you guys are doing great.
The last couple of weeks we've had some bot attacks, which you did brilliantly. But here you're picking up on things that I missed in the chat. Thank you so much, guys. I hugely appreciate what you do. But this is saying, have you heard of the Wade collection at Wheaton College, Chicago? Memorabilia from the Inklings, Tolkien's desk and pipe, C.S. Lewis's wardrobe, plus research. I have heard of it. I've not been there. I did. It seems like a previous age now, pre-COVID. There was an exhibition in Oxford that I went to. It must have been 3 years ago now, and they had lots of his original writings and his letters on display there, which was absolutely fascinating. And so you see just, and he was, as I've sort of explained, he would just scribble things in the same way he would scribble things just like legendarily. Obviously he wrote in A Hole in the Ground There Lived a Hobbit on the back of an exam paper. He did do that with drawings as well, and so you obviously the classic drawings that he did that you get from that. I don't think I've got it on me at the moment, but you get the cover of the classic Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit with he did all of those drawings. So there was some absolutely fantastic stuff there, and some letters as well that he wrote, which in fact there was one from I think I saw it there, the fantastic one from a Mr. Sam Gamgee, who had written to him and had said that he'd heard that there was a character called Sam Gamgee in his novel, and Tolkien wrote back and said, well, you'll be delighted to hear that this is actually a fantastic character and he's a really great guy and all the rest of it. I read afterwards about the fact that he said for years afterwards he was dreading the fact that he might receive a letter from Mr. Schmeagol, and he'd have to regrettably inform him that his character was perhaps not quite as likable. But anyway, that's a complete digression. So I have heard of that collection. I have not had the chance to go and see that. I don't know, have you, Joysten, at all?
No, I haven't. I want to go to England. My father, a couple years back, he was able to visit the pub. Was it the Eagle and Baby?
Eagle and Child.
Eagle and Child, and he was able to have a glass there, and then he visited Tolkien's grave. So definitely great sites that I want to see at some point for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I would highly recommend. If you're in Oxford, then assume it's still open. It certainly was last time I was in Oxford at Eagle and Child, and you can go and sit there. And this was where the Inklings, for those who don't know, this was the writing club, effectively, that Tolkien and C.S. Lewis and a few of their friends had, and they met every week and shared their classic stories with each other. So I'd highly recommend that. And also Sarehole Mill in Birmingham, if you know it, which is the one place that gets name checked in the introduction to the Lord of the Rings. This is where Tolkien grew up, and the Shire, based the idea of the Shire, the mill there was all based on that. Great places to go and visit. Cloaked One, hi there, saying, just wanted to give a well-deserved shout out. A couple of weeks ago, Mathieu Dominique celebrated his first anniversary of watching the live streams. Can't imagine the IDG chat without this top bloke. Well, Mathieu Dominique is a great guy, and so I hadn't realised that first anniversary. I didn't know people celebrated anniversaries of watching my live streams, but that's a fantastic welcome. And if this is your first time, by the way, watching a live stream, welcome. I know it's a very different experience watching it live to watching it a bit later on or listening a little bit later on. So if this is your first time, then welcome. Question from one of my patrons. I try to frame these as much as I can around questions from my patrons. And I'll do a very quick shout out, as always do. Patrons, thank you. I cannot do what I do without your support. It is literally what helps me, gives me the freedom to create the content that I do. So thank you so much. One of the benefits that I try and give for my patrons is priority questions for these live streams. So thank you very much. If you are interested in supporting the channel, the best way to do that is by joining my Patreon, and there is a link down in the description. But a question from one of my patrons, Creative Branches, saying, good evening, Robert. The lamps of Valar and the two trees of Valinor seem to hold the same light, just like Galadriel's hair. Since the lamps were in ancient Middle-earth and the trees were in Aman, do you think the light of the trees came from the lamps, or do you think the trees were infused with light in similar ways or with similar magic? I'll throw this one to you first, Joyce, as we were talking. So to remind you, the lamps came first. This was the first thing when the Valar decided they needed some light, created these two big lamps. They got destroyed. Then they retreated over to their new little continent and thought, well, we still need light. And so they created these two trees. In fact, now is the time. You don't mind me making you disappear for just one moment, Joyster?
Yeah, no problem.
These two trees. I will talk about this in a little bit more, but this is very exciting. So there are two trees which the Valar created over in Aman, and they brought light, and so they did it on a kind of timeshare basis. So one was light and then slowly dimmed, and the other one came up. But as you say, the time was a lot slower, the sort of almost like a 10-to-1 basis. So a day there was a lot longer. So I think the question for you, Josten, is: do you think that they're the same? In terms of the light itself, clearly they're different things. The lamps and the trees. Is the light the same? Do you think?
So it's a really good question, and I think so, or at least they're very similar. I've got a PDF of the Silmarillion pulled up, so I am able to kind of pull up some research here real fast. It says that in chapter 1 of the beginning of days, Aule, at the prayer of his wife Yavanna, 2 of the Valar, Aule wrought the lamps, so he built the kind of stonework of the lamps. So and then Varda filled the lamps, and Manwë hollowed them. I believe Varda also gave light to the two trees and hallowed them as well. Yes, I believe that's the case. So it's very similar light.
So, I mean, I think they're different. So, I think I would agree with this. That they are similar. Like, just to pick up the Galadriel hair thing, this is just this is something that was said about her hair, that her hair caught the light. It's not that it didn't generate light; it was said that it caught the light. So, and whether or not that was actually the case, we do not know. But there's probably, and this was allegedly what gave Feanor the idea for the Silmarils, which also caught the light of the trees.
Absolutely.
So that was what was going on there. They're not generating the light, catching the light. What I would love to put to you just sort of a thought that I've always had about the trees and the lamps.
Yeah.
That I don't know, but what it feels like is that the lamps were much more kind of mechanistic. They're just there to create light. They're just that's what they're there to do. It's for a job. Whereas the trees seem to be obviously a whole lot more sort of organic. They're trees, like their growth, they're sort of one comes up in light and the other one goes down, and it feels a lot more beautiful in a way.
Absolutely.
And this, one of the things I said towards the start of this live stream was talking about how the discordant notes of Melkor often can be part of the greater theme and actually create good and great things. The trees would not have been created but for him destroying the lamps. And
Absolutely.
A thought I've always had, and I'd love your thoughts on this, is that this is actually part of the bigger plan, which means that, yes, the trees the sort of light, it's hallowed light, it's sort of the same, but in a way they're better because they're more natural. We know Tolkien loves nature and things like that. They're more natural, and they're more giving, and they're more part of their environment.
Yeah, I would agree with that. In the two lamps versus the two trees, it's always kind of confused me, to be honest, because I wondered at, I guess, the purpose of the lamps. They are created and destroyed within a couple paragraphs of each other, and then we get the trees for hundreds of years. And I think you're absolutely right. I think the lamps are mechanistic, and they're there to serve a purpose, to create light. And I don't think they believed Melkor would destroy the lamps, so they probably were like, okay, we're fine, we're gonna go hang out on our island and everything's gonna be great. And then Melkor did destroy them, and so I think when they moved to Valinor, that purpose with Valinor became, we're going to make a very protected and safe stronghold, but we're also going to infuse beauty and the different elements of the world into this. It says a lot that Nienna, that her tears helped the trees grow. And Yavanna, she prayed for the growth of these trees, and Varda had an aspect of helping to create them as well. I agree. It's a lot more of a kind of literarily romantic way of doing this light thing. Yeah,
I would agree completely. So I think the light itself may well have been the same in terms of it being hallowed, but I think that the trees were the greater achievement, more wonderful thing.
Yeah.
Cloaked One, thank you for picking up. Thank you, Cloaked One. You're always doing this, picking up questions for other people. Ian Kiplinsky, do you think Tolkien's walls in the north and south inspired A Song of Ice and Fire's The Wall and the Five Forts? Now, in terms of the walls in the north and the south, I'm not sure whether you're talking about the sort of the mountain walls around Valinor, but in terms of did they inspire the wall and the Five Forts, I think that George R. R. Martin has been, sometimes he's very clear on what his inspirations are, sometimes he's not very clear. He was very clear that the wall was inspired by Hadrian's Wall in the north of England, separating the Roman Empire from where the heathen Scots were. So that seems to very much been that inspiration. And the Five Forts, it's sort of like, and we've been talking about Tolkien sort of developing his vision and understanding of his world. George R. R. Martin does the same, incidentally. He talks about himself as being a gardener writer, which he means is that he just allows his garden to grow as he writes, and this is how his planned small trilogies has turned into this mammoth thing that it is right now, because he allows this garden to grow as he goes along, and then he follows it where it leads. The Five Forts were not part of the initial idea, that the pitch that he put there, they seem to be an expression of him following this idea about, well, what would happen right over at the very far east, and that seems to be an echo of what was there in the wall. So that's my take. I don't know how deep into the weeds of A Song of Ice and Fire you do actually go, Joysten. So do you have any thoughts on this in terms of walls?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just dabble a little bit with A Song of Ice and Fire, but with literary walls such as the wall in the north and then the walls of Valinor, I doubt George R. R. Martin was much inspired by like the Pelori Mountains, because they were raised to, I feel like, keep Morgoth out, yes, and to keep his attacks out, but also to make sure that the elves couldn't return in the same way that they left with the Helcaraxe. And then in Game of Thrones, it was to keep the others at bay to the north, and then to keep Westeros safe. Honestly, I see the Valar raising the Pelori Mountains as a bit of a cowardice act. They're already far away. Melkor wasn't really that concerned with fighting them at the time. They didn't have to raise the mountains further after, in the First Age. But the wall in Game of Thrones was there for the survival of humanity. So definitely different in terms of themes as well. Yeah,
absolutely. I agree. Question from Lyle Hammock saying, actually, just before we get to that, I did have another thought. One of the other links between George R. R. Martin and J.R. Tolkien, simply because I was listening to it earlier in the Silmarillion, he picks up a lot of phraseology. Watchers on the Wall is a phrase that's in the Silmarillion as well, and just simply going through the pages of the Silmarillion, you'll find Tyrion. You'll find favorite is Arthur Dane for those who are big fans. Is both a place in Middle Earth and is a person in A Song of Ice and Fire. I can just imagine George R. R. Martin going, Arthur Dane, that sounds like a person. I'll make him a person.
I can't say Arthur Dane anymore. Like I always say Arthedain, and I'm like, wait.
But that's exactly how it's written, and I can entirely understand the thought process. So yeah, there's a lot there. Lyle Hammock saying, what is your view on Feanor? I find him fascinating and incredibly compelling. Do you think if Miriel had left him, things would be different? Feanor, I don't want to get too deep into Feanor because he's at this stage, because he's a massive character, but his importance really comes as we're sort of shifting across into the First Age. But a high level, who is Feanor, is he was an elf, and he was the greatest of the elves, the greatest of the Noldor. There are 3 different types of elves, very broadly speaking, and the Noldor are the exciting ones. He was a great smith, a great creator of things, hugely charismatic person, inventor of language and lots of other things. He seemed to be quite a polymath. He created the Silmarils, which are these 3 jewels that drive the action in basically the Silmarillion, the main bulk of the First Age in the Silmarillion, and we'll get onto this in a second, but the trees again are destroyed. Melkor, up to his nefarious bad things, gets rid of the trees as well, and the only remaining light from these trees is in the Silmarils, so he then wants to get them back because Melkor steals them as well, and he causes a revolt, and a whole load of these elves then leave this wonderful, blissful place that they've been brought to and head back to Middle Earth to go and, well, for a variety of reasons, but he's going back there to try and recapture these jewels that he's been making. So what do I make of him? Yes, he's fascinating. He's an amazing character. He's one of the key people in the entire elf history. In fact, possibly you could argue he was the most important person for that time period for the elves. Compelling, yes. He's he. It's hard to see. You can see the evil kind of starting to drip into him, but at the same time, you kind of, like we were talking before, you kind of understand it. You kind of think, well, yes, somebody's just stolen the thing that he's poured all of his creative juices into his heart and his soul, and then people are trying to take them off of him. Of course, you kind of understand him going there. But I want to leave a bigger discussion of that for another time. But what's your thoughts on this?
Well, so that comment brought up Miriel, right? His wife.
Yes.
I think if I always think back to that quote actually from Game of Thrones, from Aemon, where it was "Love is the death of duty," and for Feanor, it's like duty was definitely the death of love for him. He didn't care about Miriel at all, unfortunately. She just wanted him to leave behind the 2 youngest sons of the 7. He wasn't even willing to do that. She wouldn't follow him to Middle Earth, and he didn't care. It was a very bad relationship, so I don't think anything she could have done could have stopped him. He was all about duty. He didn't care about love at all. He wanted his Silmarils. He wanted vengeance, and it's everything you said. He really propels the world into the First Age in so many ways, but that'll be a future conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do Lorenzo Cruz. Very quick question, saying Valar and Morgoth versus Ungoliant and the Silmarils. Who wins? If it's okay with you, I'm going to pick this up later. I've got a question from my patrons that's specifically about this and how powerful is Ungoliant compared to the others, because it is a really interesting question. If it's okay with you, we'll wrap that one up with that, and then I think I had one more question. John saying, "Hey Robert, been a fan for years. Thank you for your work. How different do you think Lord of the Rings would be if Tolkien had finished the Silmarillion first?" Well, fascinating question, because the timing of this is interesting, because the Silmarillion as we know it is basically, this is just his life's work, and this is what he started doing early drafts of this when he was still a child, and sort of built it up over time, and what we have as the Silmarillion is just a snapshot. This is where they were at basically when Christopher Tolkien decided to draw a line around it, and so that's what we're at. But in terms of publication, yes, that was published posthumously by Christopher Tolkien, but in terms of publication, that was actually what J.R.R. Tolkien wanted to have published next after The Hobbit. He got The Hobbit done. Everyone loves him. He says, "Do you know what? I think the next thing we should do is this incredibly complicated ancient history. I think people would love it." And his publishers understandably said, "Yeah, I mean, have you got any other children's stories?" He did have it. So I don't think it's quite as clear cut as saying what if that were published first, because it carried on being developed and created through his lifetime. But in terms of how different the Lord of the Rings would have been if he'd finished the Silmarillion first, if he'd published it first, I mean, I don't know whether on that point, Joysten, you want to come in. If he had got his way, if he had then published the Silmarillion and then the Lord of the Rings at some point later, what difference would this have made?
Yeah, I know he tossed around the idea of not even having The Hobbit be in the same universe as the Silmarillion originally, which would have put Lord of the Rings in also a separate universe. But I think if he was like, okay, Hobbit, Silmarillion, Lord of the Rings, there would have been more connections to the Silmarillion through the Lord of the Rings. A couple issues that we have through the publication as it happened, such as the problem of Gil-galad's parentage, things along those lines, those would have likely been resolved because we would have had to have that clearer connection. Yeah, I think there would have been other things at work. I wondered about this today when I was working on the Olmo video. It's, we see quite a bit of Ulmo in the Silmarillion, but we see no reference to him in the Lord of the Rings. Even though I always feel like he's working in more subtle ways throughout the Lord of the Rings. Perhaps you would have had more Valinor, more Valar intervention throughout the Lord of the Rings, but at the same time, I'm glad that wasn't the case. So it's really hard to say for sure.
Yeah, I think I would agree. It's one of those things that we could sort of ponder for a long time, but it's Tolkien himself did not view the Lord of the Rings as his great masterwork. He viewed it as a story that came off of his great masterwork. Lyle Hammock, just following up from the earlier question, saying I was talking about Feanor's mother, who died giving birth to him and did not come back from Mandos, and her influence lingers in his family. Yeah, so this is Miriel.
Yeah, this is Miriel. Who's Feanor's wife? I don't know.
I always have mine. Yes, I always have mind blanks. Yeah. There's always at least one mind blank every single live stream.
Same.
And that's absolutely fine. So she, the story here is Feanor's mother died shortly after giving birth to him, basically, because, and Tolkien puts it in much more poetic language than I can, but she puts so much of her life energy into him because he is just this astonishing guy that she just gave up, basically.
Yeah, and his spirit of fire. Sorry to interrupt, but
no, go.
That, like, his spirit of fire also took her life. He was so much, even in birth, that his fiery spirit ended her.
Yeah, exactly. And so she like goes and says that's it, I've had enough, and the husband goes off and sort of says, Ned, come on, lie down here in the nice park, you'll recover yourself in a moment. And she lies down for a quick nap and then dies. Yeah. And that's pretty much it. And so the impact of this in terms of the story is that Feanor, well, there are two big impacts. The first of all is that he gets a whole load of half-brothers because his father remarries, and that will cause a huge amount of strife down the line. But in terms of him, who he is and how he was raised, he was... everything was there. So everything that his father, so Finway's love just went in on him. He focused in on him. This is the golden child. Everything about this child, I'm just giving him everything. And that undoubtedly, Tolkien hints, did lead to a lot of his character, of who he was as a person. He does have a lot of, I think, what today we would call entitlement about him, Feanor. Yeah. He does, and a lot of it is one of those really annoying, and so if you ever met people like this in life, they are very annoying, where they've got a massive ego, but most of it is actually deserved. He actually, yes, you hate his huge ego, but you have to say, you are the greatest elf of all time. Yeah. So it's very annoying. But so I don't think that element would have changed for me. Yes, if his mother had been around, then that would have tempered him. That's certainly what Tolkien seems to be implying. That would have tempered him to a degree. But who he was as a person, this spirit of fire, no, that was always going to be there.
Yeah, I completely agree. He was who he was from birth. Certain things would have changed that I would have been curious that I'm curious what would have changed his personality. Those half-brothers, those pesky half-brothers that you mentioned earlier. When he drew his sword on Fingolfin during the Years of the Trees, and that got him banished. Finwë went with him, who was the king, and then all of a sudden it was like Fingolfin kind of had to pick up the pieces of that political strife. I wonder if that would have happened if he was his full-blooded brother, if he would have been as jealous from Fingolfin especially, but also a bit from Finarfin. So yeah, I think he would have been relatively the same, but I think he would have been less jealous. He would have had more love from his parents as a child, and it would have been less grief-driven love that he got from his father. He would have definitely been healthier. Would have had a healthier relationship, probably with his wife as well, Eärendil. So versus what I described earlier, where she said, "At least leave our youngest with me," and he said, "No, see ya." So yeah,
yeah. Okay, so I hope that answered that one for you a little bit more, Lyle. Dylan over on Patreon saying, "Hi Robert, I'm excited to ask my first question as a patron." Well, I'm delighted you are. What role did the goblins play in Middle-earth before The Hobbit? We hear of goblin wars, and at the end of The Hobbit they are beaten to near extinction, but did the goblins play a larger role in the earlier ages of Middle-earth? Well, yes is the short answer, but this is a terminological issue. So this is, and I think we can go into lots of detail about this, but it's probably fair to say where Tolkien came to is that goblins and orcs, they're the same. So it's just different words for the same thing. That probably when he was in writing The Hobbit, that probably wasn't where he was at. He viewed goblins and orcs as being slightly different, but certainly by the time of The Lord of the Rings, then they were interchangeable. So if we treat goblins as orcs, but perhaps just sort of like the clan that we get in the Misty Mountains that Bilbo and co come across, then orcs have been around since the very, very early days. So when the elves first appeared, if you remember back to what I was saying, so the elves awaken, the firstborn of Iluvatar. The first thing they see are the stars. What has happened is that the Valar, as we've said, they kind of retreated across the ocean. They're hiding away. A couple of them are still sort of dotting about here and there, just keeping an eye on things, but mostly they're not all over what we would think of as Middle Earth. The person who is Morgoth. And he sees the elves and he then starts kidnapping them, to put no finer point on it. And he starts sowing seeds of discontent and doubt about the Valar, because eventually the Valar Orome does come across and meets them and goes, "Hey guys, we've been waiting for you." But they're scared of him because Morgoth's been telling them lies about the Valar. But these kidnapped elves, the ones who sort of like wandered away and get captured, they are what form the basis of orcs. So Morgoth cannot create things ex nihilo. That is something only Eru can do. He cannot create from nothing. He wants to create. He's got this burning urge to create, but he can't create from nothing. So he has to create with some materials that he's got around him. So he gets the elves, takes some elves, and he turns them into orcs. With the language is quite vague. There's lots of debate about all of the details about all of this, but that is the starting point for where they come from. And then all the way through from then on, they are the journeyman, the cannon fodder of Morgoth's army, then later on Sauron's army. So they appear all the way through thousands of years worth of Middle-earth history. Is there anything you wanted to sort of add on to that, or nuances on the elf-orc thing?
Yeah, so I think you're right in that by the time he was finished with The Lord of the Rings, they were pretty much synonymous. It is a bit of an oddity because when Bilbo and all the rest are going through Goblin Town, it seems like these are a different clan of orcs or goblins than Bolg and the orcs that show up in the Battle of the Five Armies. And there is a bit of that. If they were different, I imagine goblins to be smaller in stature, to be a little weaker because of the things that are associated with goblins, like the like Bull Roar Took and the Battle of the Green Fields, where a bunch of hobbits slew goblins. Because if they were orcs, we think of the orcs that maybe slew Boromir, and then and some of those Uruk-hai as well, and that becomes problematic when it's like, oh, the hobbits beat them. That's interesting. So there's a little bit of continuity error between goblins and orcs, but I think you're right. By the end of the Lord of the Rings, hobbits pretty much called orcs goblins, and then everybody else just called them orcs.
Yeah, I mean, the way I kind of understand this myself, Tolkien didn't write it out quite this way, but the sort of the hints are there, is that you get, clearly in Mordor, you get the sort of the, by the end of the Third Age, the time of the Hobbit, the Lord of the Rings, you get the Sauron-y orcs, and you also get some that are based around where the sort of the baddie control is. But under the Misty Mountains, if there is this long established encampment of orcs, it's been a while since they've had somebody there in charge of them.
That's a great point.
Whereas they may once have the Witch King was up there and thereabouts for a long period of time in the earlier part of the Third Age. They didn't have an overarching control, so they would have developed their own culture. So again, it's not something Tolkien said specifically, but it works for me that yes, there is a difference over time.
I like that because even the Goblin King, he seemed somewhat of a threat to the dwarves, but not as much of a threat as Gothmog, if Gothmog was an orc in the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. So yeah, I like that.
Excellent. Good. So let's go with a question from, pardon me, from Lindsay Petruchok. A name I'm sure I mispronounced. Apologies. I'm reading the Silmarillion now, Lindsay says. I'm at the Voyage of Eärendil and don't mind spoilers. Excellent. But I'm confused about why the Valar don't travel more. These were the Ainur most interested in the world, but when they make their homes in Valinor, many don't travel far if at all. Do we ever get an explanation for why so many stay rooted in Valinor instead of traveling to this new world and helping the children of Iluvatar? At this point in the story, it seems like they are only willing to help the elves who went to the Undying Lands, and they don't think of men at all. How did the Valar go from being so invested in the world to ignoring so much of it? Well, excellent question. And we've been sort of skating around this for a reasonable amount of this stream. The Valar do, and this is my high-level answer. Joyston will have a more detailed and more accurate answer in just one moment, I'm sure. The high-level answer is that they start off very engaged, and then over time, you're right, they go from being there where they think that the children of Iluvatar are going to be to somewhere else, but keeping an eye out for the children of Iluvatar, to building a barrier to prevent some of the children of Iluvatar coming there at all, to not really going anywhere near Middle-earth, but just sending emissaries over there, to actually taking themselves off to effectively a completely different plane and not engaging much at all. The direction of travel is very clear here. They were very engaged, personally engaged, and then the further through time you get, the less engaged they are. And this isn't something Tolkien, as far as I'm aware, and I'd love maybe, Joyston, you've picked up on it somewhere, it's not something Tolkien explicitly addresses, other than to say that before the end, the Valar will get weary. And that, I think, is probably what we're kind of seeing, is that over time, the level of engagement gets less and less. They've done their bit. They've done the big creation stuff. They've protected certainly the elves when they first started out, and then over time they're just letting the world manage itself, and their creative juices have been done. But what's your take on this?
I think from an author's kind of outside of book point of view, I think he has a motivation to not make the Valar to interfere too much. I think it's a theological tie there as well. Like you say, over time, that the gods interfere less, and they say we've kind of done our part. The children of Iluvatar, like, they rule the world now, and they kind of do what they want. The only problem that I have with that is that Melkor is one of the Valar, or at least of the same level as the Valar. So in my mind, they had a duty there. With Sauron, they sent other Maiar, they sent the wizards to combat him, and they were of equal power. So I feel like as far as that goes, it's like, okay, we're going to be removed enough because we're weary and we're so far into this world nowadays that we're going to send people that are of equal power, at least their spirits are of equal power to Sauron, and we're going to call it good at that. But it's not as explicitly said, but in the War of Wrath at the end of the first age, when Melkor was taken down for the last time, I imagine the Valar were there themselves, although Eonwe, the Maiar herald of Manwë, he kind of organized this whole army. But I think the Valar at that point had a duty to help take down one of their own. But I think over time, especially, I think there's a theological philosophy that Tolkien kind of holds there, where it's like gods can only interfere so much because of free will, because of humankind, that people have to arrive at their own destinies, I guess. It's really hard to pinpoint because, like you said, Tolkien doesn't exactly address it. So where all of a sudden this interventionalism comes from, I have no idea.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. I mean, I think you're entirely right with his sort of philosophical, theological worldview, certainly bearing out there. I think the only other nuance to this, I would say, is that this does vary Valar to Valar, and we kind of treat them as one whole mass, and we probably shouldn't. And incidentally, quick plug: my video tomorrow is about the Valar as a whole. So if you want sort of an explanation of who the Valar are, then do check out my channel tomorrow. But some of them I kind of go a bit easier on in terms of this. Like Mandos, for example, his role effectively is being in charge of the underworld. He's not supposed to be directly intervening with what's going on over in Middle-earth. He's doing his job. Manwë, similarly, he's the king, but he's also the most far-sighted. He sits atop a massive mountain, and he created very early on, he created eagles, and the great eagles are from him. They go out and do report back to him. So he is keeping an eye on what's going on. Yeah. And my favorite Ulmo is that you can see throughout the Silmarillion, he's always like first age stuff. He's like popping up, appearing in people's dreams, saying, "Hey, do you want to create a secret city? It would be a great idea." That kind of thing. And he's always just like randomly doing that kind of. So he doesn't. It's the other ones that I get a little bit more frustrated about. Tulkas having sort of come in doesn't then, he never, or Orome, they have got a more of a roving brief, but then don't seem to do anything about it after.
Absolutely.
After quite early on.
And even Manwë, like he sits atop his mountain, but he, in the eyes of Ilúvatar, he's seen as the brother of Melkor. In my mind, that gave him some sort of familial duty to try to stop that threat, but he never really took it upon himself to ever do that. It's tough. And like you say, Orome and Tulkas, I mean, where were they? It's a good question. And that's honestly, to go back to Feanor for a moment, that is perhaps one of the only places where at least his motivation is like, oh, I see where he's coming from. He asks the Valar, why aren't you doing anything? He's one of your own. You're not helping us. You're not trying to take the fight to him. And they do just sit there. They don't do anything. So he takes it into his own hands. I at least kind of understand his motivation there. Yeah,
exactly. Cloaked One picking up again for question for someone else, for Shiva and Yug, saying, at the beginning, Ulmo favoured the idea of leaving the elves in Middle-earth, their birthplace. What do you think of this? How would things have been different if the elves never left Middle-earth? We did actually cover this one slightly higher up in the live stream if you want to scroll back. So I think on this one, the only thing I would just sort of add to it is because we were talking about Ulmo a little bit earlier, I find this quite fascinating because he is, as we've been saying, the most interventionist of the Valar going forward. He helps out, he prompts things, he saves people from storms, that kind of stuff. And yet he was the person who was wanting to leave them where they were. So his position is not, it's worth sort of nuancing. His position is not, we should just leave them alone there. It's, this is where they were and where they belong. and we should be helping them out from the sidelines. That seems to be what his position is, rather than let's leave them alone or let's bring them across. That seems to be where he's at. But as I say, if you want, we both talked in depth about that a little bit higher up in the live stream. Reflective rambling, picking up from Mattia Dominique, saying, as Eärendil was mentioned, if I understood it correctly, he traveled on a flying boat and became a star.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Close enough. Yeah, that's where he ended up. That's where he ended up for sure.
Do you want to sort of expand on that a little bit?
Sure. So after he and Elwing got to Valinor, the Valar heard his plea to aid the Free Peoples, and the problem, the one that Ulmo actually raises, is because they say, "Are we going to let a mortal man come here and walk unabated in our undying lands?" And Ulmo says, now I have this question for you. Is he the son of Tuor, a man, or is he the son of Eärendil, a high elf? And he's really both. And so they say, okay, we'll take you, and we're going to offer a choice to future half-elves to choose if you're more elf or if you're more man. And as for you, you too, Elwing as well, because she was also a half-elf, we'll let you live, but you can't ever walk. You can't ever step foot on Middle-earth again after coming here. So Eärendil will take your ship. Vingalat will hallow it, and you'll be able to sail the skies while wearing the Silmaril, and thus you're a star. Venus, I believe, the evening star. And Elwing, she is at one point taught how to become a bird by Ulmo, or at least given that spell so she can survive the ocean and come to her husband. And eventually she learns to do that more, and she even learns the speech of birds, so then she can rise up to meet her husband in the sky when he returns. So yeah, you're right.
Yeah, so he's the guy, basically, to put him into the historical context. He is the guy who, in the first age, when Feanor and all the elves, the older elves, go back, there's just a long series of battles and this hugely long-running siege of Angband, which is where Morgoth Melkor is. And eventually, long story short, it all goes pear-shaped, and Morgoth, having built up his army, sends it all out, defeats lots of people, and the elves go, okay, so we need some help here, and they send, or Eärendil goes off to try and get the Valar to do what they should be doing, let's say. So that's where he fits into it, and that's where one of the Silmarils, and spoilers for going forward, but the point about the Silmarils, where they end up, is that one ends in the sky, one ends in the sea, one ends in the earth, and they are of creation and sort of encapsulating it, and that kind of matches up to the three original Valar who we sort of have there as the sea, the sky being Manwë, the sea being Ulmo, and then Aula being the earth. And they were the three that we originally get told about bearing the brunt of creating Middle-earth. So thematically all ties in. Lyle Hammock, this is a question you put over on Patreon, saying, hello Robert, excited for the stream and the fact you have Men of the West. I love both of your content. My question is about the so-called nameless things which gnaw tunnels in the darkest depths of the Misty Mountains. Is it possible they came from the void and entered Arda? Also, what is Ungoliant? Melkor didn't make her, and she wasn't one of the Valar or Maya. Did he meet her in the void? Let's get on to Ungoliant in a moment, because I've got a couple of other questions about Ungoliant, and we'll try and wrap them all up together, I think. But the nameless things which gnaw tunnels in the darkest depths of the Misty Mountains, I think this is a reference to what Gandalf was talking about when he fights the Balrog, and he basically, when below the Misty Mountains, or just outside the Misty Mountains, there are these two like creatures. You get the Watcher in the Waters, that strange kind of octopusy weird thing just outside Moria, and then you get the Balrog inside. And then Gandalf fights the Balrog, and we know what happens. He sort of comes up and he talks about there being these other nameless things that we can't. It's too much for you guys to think about. Let's not worry about them right now. We've moved on. That's the kind of feel. So, what do you think these nameless things gnawing at the darkest depths are?
I've always wanted to make a video on them, but we only have one line of the entire legendarium, I believe, that mentions them, and that's Gandalf in the Two Towers. He says, "Far, far below the deepest delving of the dwarves, the world is gnawed by nameless things. Even Sauron knows them not. They are older than he. Now I have walked there, but I will bring no report to darken the light of day." It's definitely possible that Melkor knew how to manipulate something to pervert a different creature into the nameless creatures. It's totally possible that they were remnants of some sort of creature that he did because he raised the Misty Mountains originally. But he had more knowledge in some ways, as presented in the Ainu Lindale, than Aule did of the earth and of its different substances. So he may have created them, but I honestly don't have much to go off of with these kinds of creatures. They seem to be evil if Gandalf is afraid of them, and if Sauron doesn't know them, they seem to be to have been in the earth for a long time. But I would imagine if we're going to pinpoint some sort of origin, either Aule knows them or created them himself, or Melkor did in the earliest of the shaping of the world, and he put them far, far beneath a bunch of rock.
Yeah, I think, as you say, we've only got the one sentence, so we can't overinterpret this, or we shouldn't. We can overinterpret this, but we probably shouldn't. The fact that Sauron doesn't really know about them is probably the biggest clue we've got there, because otherwise I would have said that these are things which have come down with Melkor at the very beginning. But what we do have is when Morgoth gets defeated, then his allies do sort of go deep underground and hide away underground. And so this is probably that. These are somehow Morgoth's allies in some way, or the people that he has working for him. Exactly what they are, we don't know. Gandalf doesn't elaborate on them, but it does kind of link in, I think, quite well. I love it when these things go seamlessly with Lyle Hammock question: does dragons are made? Given that Morgoth can only twist life, not create it, which is fascinating. So dragons are, if you're unaware, obviously there are dragons in Tolkien's world. We see Smaug, who's a later dragon, but these were created by Morgoth when he realized the orcs weren't really cutting it. They're fine for like having lots of them to throw at an enemy, but they're not like very impressive individually. So he made dragons. Now, as we've said, he can't make things from nothing, so he must have made them from something. I don't think we get a line anywhere that's as clear and explicit as what we have about the elves and orcs, but the clear implication is that he bred them. That I think, and that there's some wording around breeding them, which does seem to imply that from something that he had around there, maybe he found some Komodo dragons and just made them bigger or something. The first ones didn't have wings, or the first one didn't have wings. So it seems to be over a long period of time, he, using magic and whatever raw materials he had around him, he created them. But have you got have you done a dragons video at all?
I have, yeah. So my thoughts on dragons, I always actually look at trolls, interestingly enough, to understand dragons, because trolls are said to have been made in mockery of the Ents. Now, it's said, and I think this is a bit of a conundrum within the Silmarillion, because it's said, like you said before, that Morgoth can't create; he can only manipulate and pervert. But I think trolls were made out of like substances from the earth, out of stone, out of mud, these kinds of things. And I believe with dragons, I wouldn't be surprised if they were made in mockery of the great eagles of Manwë. I just as the trolls were made in mockery of the Ents of Yavanna. That wouldn't surprise me one bit. But like you say, how they got wings, I'm not sure if he took an eagle and manipulated one, or if he saw the eagles and said, I'm going to work with whatever substances I have here in Angband. And he just tried to kind of make this amalgamation of substances that became Glaurung. I'm not exactly sure, especially because Glaurung didn't have wings. But that's always been my thought, is that dragons were made in mockery of the eagles, just as trolls were made in mockery of the Ents.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I'm going with that. That's now my headcanon. Thank you for that. Jewel Elson, thank you so much for the super sticker. Let's get on to, I've sort of kept on pushing this one back, but we've got questions about Ungoliant. So Lindsay Petrushok, how did Tom Bombadil and Ungoliant get to Arda? They seem to suggest that they arrived before the Ainur, or at least before Melkor. Were they created by the song that made Arda? And Rusted Iron Hinge saying, hi Robert, do you think Melkor or Ungoliant was the more powerful entity? So let's get into it. Where do you want to start? Tom Bombadil, we talked about Tom Bombadil a little bit before.
Yeah.
So let's go on to Ungoliant, shall we?
Yeah.
The background and history here for Ungoliant, just to set the scene before we get into this. So this was, we've already talked about how Morgoth has gone in and he took out the lamps, and so the after that, then the Valar basically captured him, imprisoned him for a long period of time. Then he came out, said, hey, I'm a reformed character, I'm great now. And I kind of believed him for a bit. Not everyone, obviously. Our favorites did not. But he then comes out, but then he hatches this other cunning plan, and he's going to kill the trees this time because, he hates light. And the person that he ropes into this is, or person is probably the wrong way of saying, the being that he ropes into this is Ungoliant, who is an astonishing character, who is, in relation to the story that we know in the Lord of the Rings, this is the mother of Shelob, so we're thinking spiderish, but more so. This creature seems to drink light and life and power and goodness, and be able to secrete the opposite, unlight, which is what Tolkien refers to it as. And so basically what Morgoth does is says, hey, come along with me, do you want to drink the light from the trees? And Ungoliant goes, yes, does that. And that's how the light from the trees goes out. Following which they made the sun and the moon, obviously. So again, good things come out of all of the bad things. But that is who Ungoliant is, and it's incredibly visceral, this narrative. We've had a lot of very quite high-level descriptions of what's happening. So that far in the Silmarillion, and then suddenly you get this incredibly beautiful prose, I say beautiful, about a very ugly creature, Ungoliant. So where do you think Ungoliant came from?
So I think having the comparison between Ungoliant and Tom Bombadil is a good one, because they're both enigmas of Middle-earth. Whether or not they were Ainur, it's possible, and they descended on Arda of their own volition. It's possible. It's interesting that Ungoliant started. We first acknowledge her in Valinor, that she kind of was south of the Pelori Mountains, was south and towards the sea and everything, because you have this land of the gods, and then you have one of the greatest evils on the planet also right there, unknown to anyone, even Arome the huntsman. So she's a tough one, because she was a shapeshifter who took the form of a spider, I believe, and like you say, she had this incredible power of unlight and everything like that. So in my mind, she couldn't have been more innately powerful than Melkor's Melkor's spirit, because in the enumerated text it says, Eru himself says, "Greatest of the Ainur is Melkor," and so if she is an Ainu, she can't be as great as he is. And even if she's not an Ainur, one of the Ainur, I would believe that she's probably still less in power than he is. However, when she would eventually go on to attack him, he was not in his most powerful form. The Silmarils were burning his hands. He was kind of caught off guard. He wasn't in this primordial state that he was in when he first entered the world, or when he was one of the Ainur. He was simply Morgoth, who is a lot more depowered and all of that. But it's tough. I think she's just an enigma as much as Tom Bombadil is, to answer your original question.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely an enigma. I mean, I tend to the view that she probably was one of the Ainur who was part of the original rebellion with Morgoth, which is how he knew of her.
Yeah.
But then she rebelled against the rebellion. And then so she sort of sets herself up, and there's this wonderful little bit of prose about how she's where she'd been living. So this is just south in the by the mountains, a little bit away from where the Valar are. And she'd got herself a sort of a cleft in the mountains, and then she'd been drinking in the light from the stars and whatever she could, sort of little bits that she could get from the lights from the trees or wherever. But as she was doing that, she was spinning a web which was blocking out more and more of the light that was coming in. So actually it was her own hunger that was causing her own downfall, which is a very Tolkienish way. And he comes in literally just like a sentence. And it's at that point, and she was starving. And it's at that point that Morgoth comes and finds her. In terms of power, and we had a couple of questions, I think, in the chat. There was one about whether her and the Silmarils would be greater than Morgoth and the Valar. Clearly, at the beginning, the power balance, Morgoth is the most. Melkor is the most powerful out of the two of them, and he's sort of bringing her along because he thinks that she can do a thing that he can't do, drinking the light. Then, however, she does drink all this light. And she gets bigger and more powerful. And we start to see Melkor, and he's like, suddenly she's trying to get rid of her because he's made promises. And he said, yes, you can have, if after all of that you still want more, I'll give you everything else. And then he like goes and tries to outrun her and like turns around and goes the other way. She's still following him. And clearly at this point, she is powerful is probably the wrong way, but he sees her as a threat.
Oh yeah.
Because he's then go, well, okay, here's some jewels. Have some jewels, pretty jewels. But she wants the Silmarils. Now, if she had the Silmarils would have made her more powerful. This seems to be what it is that she drinks in the stuff, but they're just a small amount of the light from the trees, so not hugely more powerful is my general take. And she was finally beaten off by he calls his pet Balrogs, and they all suddenly appear and then just like whip at her, and then she eventually goes. So she does get more powerful the more that she drinks, but not so powerful that a pack of Balrogs and Melkor together couldn't push her away.
Absolutely.
So that's where we're at. If you kept on feeding the beast, then she would have kept on getting more powerful.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is where, again, it's a very Tolkienish kind of thing, if she had the Silmaril more powerful, then she would have found something else to be gobbling up the stars or something. I don't know what it is, but that's the kind of feel we have.
Absolutely. I know. I think you're right on point. And I think by the time she attacked Morgoth, she was definitely a lot more powerful than she used to be. So I think that would have been definitely like a close fight, and was possibly even in her favor. And I wonder about the Silmarils as well, if she had devoured them, because after Varda had hallowed them, she said, that like no mortal hands nor hands unclean could touch them. So if Ungoliant had devoured the Silmarils, they maybe just would have burned right through her as they were burning Melkor's hand at that point in time. Anyway, it's interesting, and it's said that at the end of it all, she became so hungry that she devoured herself, and that's how she ended up dying. But it's really a tough question. I wonder if she would have devoured Morgoth as well, if how that would have gone down. It's interesting.
It is, and I mean, there's a lot. It's a fascinating part because also the trees were hallowed and the light of them was hallowed, but what she was drinking was the sap.
Yeah.
So Morgoth like thrust his spear into them, and then basically the life force of them came out, and that was what she was drinking, rather than the light literally itself. So, and the Silmarils are a slightly different thing because they're holding the light, and as you say, they were burning into Melkor's hand, Morgoth's hand, because they had been hallowed as well, and no unclean hand could touch them. So if she had swallowed them, actually, there's an argument, as you say, that they would have started burning her up from the inside. And we're getting ahead of ourselves, but that isn't indeed a thing that happens later on when we get into the first age. You get a creature that gobbles up one of them and then runs around going for a very long time. That's not a quote from Tolkien, by the way. That's my summary.
It's exactly how it's written.
Exactly, yeah. So it's entirely possible that that would have actually done her more damage than good. Lyle Hammock, also, this was I think the super chat from a long time ago. I just cut and pasted and put it lower down in I have a little document here, just letting you behind the curtain, just as this is how I keep a track of all the questions. This was one from earlier. One saying, always wondered where the dwarves went after death, since they weren't part of the great music, but made by Aula. Thanks to both of you for your outstanding content. Well, thank you, first of all. In terms of the background, I'll let you, Joysten, give your view on this, but just in terms of the background, the dwarves were not the children of Iluvatar. There were two. There was the elves and there was the humans. But while the Valar were hanging around waiting for the children of Iluvatar to appear, Aula, he's the smith, and he also loves creating things, he thought, well, I'll make some stuff then, and then he sort of formed the dwarves, and so there they were. I mean, the heretical view was they were the first because they did appear first, and then sort of basically it sort of comes out that he's done this, and we get this kind of conversation with effectively Iluvatar, sort of, and it's like, so what have you done there then? You're not supposed to do that. Creation is my thing, and basically they come to this agreement. And Aula's all very, this is just what you gave me this urge to create. That's why I create. So this is from you. Really quite persuasive little speech, and they come to this agreement. I'll just put them to sleep for a while, and then we'll let your guys appear first, and then my guys will appear after that. Okay, that's roughly where they come from. So they are part of this, but they are part of the song, because everything that happens is a part of the song, but they are not part of what the Valar were expecting. So, given that slightly different role, what do you think? Where do they go? So elves go, as you say, off to Mandos. What do you think about the dwarves?
So to throw some nuance into their creation story as well, after Eru said, "Aule, it's fine. You don't have to destroy them." I will adopt them. He says that I will adopt them as my children as well. So while they're not the first or the second born, they're kind of the adopted children of Eru. And from, as I recall, how Aule had them created, they were kind of like drones. They didn't really have the secret fire, the flame of life, free will, these kinds of things. So I see them more as puppets or in their original form. And then when Eru adopted them, he said, "You shall have free will," all of these things. But yeah, we have to put them to sleep until the elves awake. So after they live and they pass away, in the Song of Durin that Gimli sings in Moria, at the end it says, "The shadow lies upon his tomb," talking about Durin the First, "in Moria and Khazad-dûm, but still the sunken stars appear in dark and windless Mirromir. There lies his crown in Waterdeep, till Durin wakes again from sleep." So that last line, "till Durin wakes again from sleep," it speaks about some of how dwarves believe their culture goes, that Durin never actually died, that he simply he fell asleep again, like after Aule put the dwarves asleep, and that every reincarnation of Durin was that same Durin coming back, waking up once more, and then going back to sleep until Durin the Seventh and Durin the Last there. But elves kind of, I think, disagree with that account of their lives and everything like that. What dwarves also believe is when they eventually do die, they go to the halls, the mansions of Aule the Smith, and within those halls they work with Aule, their father. And then even at the end of it all, after the world is broken and the second music of the Ainur is sung, this time by elves and men, that dwarves would help in creating the next earth, the next Arda, the next world. They would help Aule in physically crafting the next world to be. So they have this very sacred and traditional view of death. Now, whether that is actually how it goes, or maybe they're set in halls really quite apart, but in the halls of Mandos, and they have a different death philosophy, that's up for debate. But that's at least what they believe, which is quite interesting.
Yes, and it's worth saying that the Silmarillion is the Elvish version of events. Pardon me. This is what is set down in sort of in world. What we have here effectively is that everything, that the stories and things that we have are things that have been transcribed by Bilbo, creating this Red Book of Westmarch, it's called, which kind of tracks back through things that Elrond had got. He copied and pasted, you know what I mean, copied across from things that he picked up when he was in Rivendell. And so what we have here are the stories that the elves have, not the stories that the dwarves have. And they might well be slightly different. So we get hints of them from things that we hear, people out of songs that we hear Gimli singing and things like that, but we don't get a full view and understanding of history. So we should trust what the elves are saying, because it's often the exact same people. With Galadriel here was the same person who was over in Valinor, so we know that it's not a made up thing. But at the same time, this is just one perspective, one limited take on what is there. So there is an element of mystery to it, because this is a different race, but created in a completely different way.
Absolutely, that's a great way to say it.
Justin Garrett, thank you very much for the super sticker. Lyle Hammaker, Lyle, you're being very generous today. Thank you so much. Saying, what happens to the houseless, the elven spirits that refuse to return to Mandos? We know they existed, always looking for a body to take over. Is it possible the wight in the barrow was one trying to take the hobbits' bodies? Okay, so the elven spirits, there's a couple of things here. The elven spirits are... This is something which we're sort of told, in this case, it's kind of sad. So there are some elves who don't want to leave Middle Earth, basically.
Yeah.
And why not? I mean, a lot of them didn't want to go, first of all, to go off to west of Valinor. It's kind of like, yes, they got sold this great idea, but some of them didn't go. Some of them went some of the way and then stayed. Some of them went all the way, got onto the floating island. If you've not come across that bit, it's great. Whopping Great Big Island, which is basically a ferry taking them over to Valinor. And then they just said, right, stop here. We're not quite there, but we quite like this island. So the elves didn't all en masse go over. Some of them hung around. And some of them didn't want to leave Middle Earth. And some of the ones who came back didn't want to leave Middle Earth. And we get this, I think the word Tolkien uses fading, that they over time they linger but they fade. And so the kind of hint that he gives us is that in our kind of modern world, this is the equivalent of ghosts, who we sort of see just out of the corner of our eye, or a presence, that kind of thing going on there. So I'll take the second half of this question in a moment, because that's a separate one. Joyce, do you want to just pick up on that in terms of the sort of the faded elves? Is there anything you wanted to add on that?
Yeah, they you put it in a really good way. So to add like a lot of complexity to this, there are Quenya terms of spirit, which is Fea or Fear, and then body, which is Hrora or Hroror. And so these two competing, or it's not competing, but it's really the mind body thing in philosophy as well. And so elves, when they fade from their Hror or their bodies, they still have their Fear, and they still have their spirits. And I believe those are what linger in the Dead Marshes, for instance, an ancient battlefield of slain elves. Some of them are houseless, some of them are faded, but some are still there. And now, so the elves who never left Middle-earth, they would fade from their physical bodies. I believe Galadriel says they would become a rustic folk of cave and dell. But they would also, like you say, be these spirits. The one in the, can I address the barrow down?
Yes, please do.
Well? Yeah. Now I believe that the barrow wight that they encountered was a fell spirit of ancient Angmar, or even of more contemporary Angmar, because the Witch King had passed through the Barrow Downs before Frodo and his company got there, and roused the dead. I believe it was a barrow wight masquerading as one of the men of Cardolan, as one who fought against the Witch King during the Angmar War of the Third Age. But I believe the elves, if you're going to find some of their spirits who stayed in Middle-earth, you would check some of their ancient battlefields, such as the Dead Marshes.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, in terms of just the barrow wight, I don't want to get too distracted on this, because this is a lot more kind of Third Agey stuff.
Yeah.
But maybe I'll just leave you with the thought. The necromancer, the Witch King, is a necromancer. He has got magic, and we very rarely kind of think about what does this mean. But we are told that when he's up there in Angmar, then yes, he does raise wights, and he sends some down to, because the remnants of the last kingdoms there up in north, in Arnor, they were down Cardolan, they were hiding out down there in the Barrow Downs, and so he sends wights down there to try and take them out. One thing which is fascinating, which is a thought I'd just like to kind of leave out there, is the fact that perhaps the Witch King, who himself is a wight, effectively, and he is a wight bound to his fate by a ring, perhaps that is, he has used some sort of that magic, a ring magic, because the barrow wights, when you actually start, there are a couple of references to them. One, obviously, when the hobbits go in there and they are wearing rings, or this wight is there wearing a ring. And then also there's another reference in the Tales of Tom Bombadil, fantastic sort of poem, talking about the barrow wights and their rings, which it's just a random thing, perhaps, but this seems to be something that is part of how you recognize what a barrow wight is, this idea of them having a ring or rings. So I do wonder whether the magic that is being used there is a sort of the next generation down from what Sauron was using in order to do his ring magic. And as we know, others can start to learn it, because Saruman also was starting to learn about ring magic. So it's just a thought to sort of
that's my new headcanon. I like that a lot. That was awesome.
Good, excellent news. Okay, well, let's Lal Hammock, thank you so much. You did do another super chat saying no question, just wanted to thank both of you for all you do and no more questions. Well, thank you being very, very generous and with the question. You do have one more question you dropped over on Patreon, which I'm happy to answer now, and which was, could you explain the main difference between elves who've seen the light of the trees and those who haven't? I feel most people just see all elves as the same. Yeah, I think that this is definitely a thing, as you say, elves, and until you start getting into it, you do kind of just think all orcs are the same, all elves are the same. Mm-hmm. That's not how Tolkien went about, particularly with elves. And this is the kind of thing, if we had the clueless fangirl on here, she would talk for ages about all the different types of elves, I am sure. But they get divided in lots of different ways. But one of the ways that Tolkien divides them up is by the ones who have seen the light of the trees and the ones who haven't. And effectively those who went to Valinor and those who didn't. Mm-hmm. And the implication is that there's a clear difference there, because the light of the trees being hallowed has sort of gone into them in some way. Now, I'd love your thoughts on what you think the difference here is. But one thing which I picked up on when I was last going through the Silmarillion was something I'd not spotted before, but it's when Feanor and the Noldor elves arrive back in Middle-earth. They've obviously been over with the light of the trees for a very long time. And they arrive in Middle-earth, and then they fight their first battle against the forces of Morgoth, and they kind of win. And then there's this kind of long period of Feanor himself dies, but there's this long period of just sort of hanging around and just sort of like camping out and talking to the other elves. And you kind of want them to go do something. And in their minds, it seems to be, we don't think that we can take Morgoth in his stronghold. That seems to be the feel. Mm-hmm. But there's this line there where Tolkien says, and this was their best chance, for the light of Valinor, the light of the trees was still in them at that time. Yeah. Which is fascinating, because I'd not picked up on it before, but it seems to imply that this gives you it sort of levels you up in some way. It gives you greater strength. It makes you more holy. Whatever it is, you got this to you, and then over time, that faded. So I found that kind of fascinating. Is there anything you see in the difference between those who have seen the light and those who haven't?
I forgot about that line. That is an incredible line. Something about the light of the two trees was still fresh in their eyes. Even in Peter Jackson's Fellowship of the Ring, when Galadriel's talking, you can see the shining light in her eyes, reflecting still that light there. I think so. If you look at the Teleri like Thingol who stayed behind in Beleriand and the elves who went to dwell in Valinor, I did a video a while back. Why are the high elves so powerful? And I think it's because of ultimately how close they were in proximity for so long, for hundreds of Valian years, to the Valar. Their associations with them, some served different beings of the Valar and gained new knowledge, gained new skills, but also just that proximity to the light of the Undying Lands, which was most definitely different light, was more powerful light than that of a torch or something like that. Mm-hmm. So when you compare somebody like Galadriel to Thingol never had that experience with for that amount of time with the Valar. He never quite he never encountered the light of the two trees beyond that one time. But it's interesting and telling how that one time, out of all of the Sindar elves, that one time made Thingol the most powerful of all the Sindar. Not only was he king, but he encountered the light of the trees once, and then he married Amaya, of course. But I think it's just the pure proximity to the two trees, to that light, and it gives them this sort of ferocity, this power. Because the battle you referred to, once Feanor and his army came across the dagger Nuin Gileath, the battle under stars, they absolutely destroyed Morgoth's army, and then they were retreating. Feanor kept after them, and then the Balrogs slew him. but yeah, they were far more powerful than Morgoth had expected. And honestly, that was because Morgoth had also been already battling with the elves of Thingol and the elves who had stayed. And he probably was like, oh, this is how powerful elves are. And then they came over and fought, and he saw that light from the two trees. I think it has something to do with that proximity.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely. Lal Hammock saying, do you think it's possible Morgoth used the houseless elven spirits, binding them to creatures in mockery of Eru, from which creatures like werewolves came from? Last question, I really mean it. I will believe you on the questions thing. In terms of the binding the elven spirits to creatures in mockery of Eru, creatures like werewolves. So for those who are unaware, yes, we do get werewolves, we do get a vampire figure, which do appear in sort of in passing. Sauron is connected with them quite a lot. And the question obviously comes, where do these are creatures from of the dark side? They are creatures from Morgoth. Where do they come from? And I have seen this idea that this is where the elven spirits that are still hanging around might go to, and I sort of like it, but at the same time, I don't think it's necessary. It's not as a by which I mean, I don't think that is the only way that this could have happened. I think that Morgoth could have done other ways to create these creatures. But what do you take? I don't know whether you've heard of this theory before as well.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting theory. I haven't heard that before, but I completely agree with you. I think there were other ways of twisting and fell magics that Morgoth was quite ingenious in his own way, and individually he was smarter than any other Vala, to my knowledge. And so it makes sense that he would be able to create Thuringwithil, the vampire, or Carcharoth, this werewolf, and in his own fell designs, because he did have a lot of years to ponder such things when he was being besieged by the elves. So
yeah,
when he was held away, he's experimenting with dragons, and it makes sense with wolves and orcs, and just trying to figure out what creatures he could kind of put together.
Yeah, absolutely. Reflective Rambling, picking up from Justin Gabbert, wanted to attach a question to his super chat. What is the most powerful elf of all time? Well, thank you, and you're saying caught by Cloaked One. Thank you both of you for picking that up on that. So we are told that Feanor is the most powerful of the Noldor, and in the story, the Lord of the Rings story, the most powerful, or the greatest, I think, is actually not. That's not the phrase. Doesn't use powerful. Tolkien used greatest, which I should probably take as a rebuke for me, because I've done a couple of videos recently saying how powerful was. So how great was. Anyway, that slight digression. I'd give myself a Tolkien slap on the wrist. But in terms of who is the most powerful elf? So Feanor stands alone in terms of sort of the named elves that we have particular story for. As we've already talked about his birth and his death, such was the fire within him that his body just burned up the moment he died. That was it. He's just like inferno around him and he's gone. The weird and strange, because he's that strongly powerful. I think there are probably, given what we've already said about the light of the trees, there are probably some elves. I talked about the Noldor being the interesting elves, the fun elves. That's because they are. But there's also the boring elves, the Vanyar, who just goody go over to do what they're told. They get invited over to Valinor. They go there. The Manwë says, "Hey, do you want to live by my mountain?" They say, "Yep," and then they just stay there, and that's pretty much it. So it would not surprise me if in there is another very powerful elf or two who's just been there in the light and proximity of the Valar and the trees. But have you got anything to add on this one?
So I agree that, at least in terms of what we read, Feanor is most definitely the greatest and most powerful. I would say in terms of skill and craft. Now, it's interesting. I haven't really thought much about how the Vanyar play into that in terms of pure power. King Ingwe of the Vanyar, he's said to be the High King of all elves because because the Vanyar are held to be higher than any of the other elves, and it makes sense. He would probably be the most powerful elf if we look at it that way. But I would also say, if we're talking about in terms of battle and skill in combat, I would probably say Finkelfin is perhaps stronger than Feanor in that regard, because he was able to do damage to Morgoth and was able to permanently scar him a few times. So it depends, I guess, on what kind of power you're looking at. At craftsmanship, at all of these things, Feanor is definitely king there. But
yeah, agreed. It looks like all of my moderators picked up on that super chat I missed. So thank you to all of you, doing an excellent job as always. Cloaked One picking up for Lawrence S, saying, was Tolkien into deeper Vedic or Indo-European literature? Because there are a lot of similarities in his talk of ages and the more mystical elements. Well, he definitely was. He was into all of that kind of stuff. Yoyston, are you more of an expert on this than me? It wouldn't be hard.
I'm not sure much, but I would agree with you, since he was really well read and his linguistics took him far afield. I would imagine so.
Yeah, so I mean, certainly in the I know the sort of the Indo-European linguistic side, there is a lot of influence going on there. I've certainly picked up on that going through, and it would not have surprised me at all in terms of sort of the legendarium that he will have picked up on a lot of that. We know Norse mythology, he definitely, that was a huge influence in a lot of what he did. The others, not quite as strong. He loved the sort of stuff like Beowulf as well. Obviously, one of my couple of favorite Tolkien anecdotes actually is that because he did lectures on he did a lecture series on Beowulf. And what he used to do in the first lecture, when you get these freshers coming in for their first year of university with the famed professor, was that he would not be there at all when they all arrived, and then he'd come in through a side door at the front of the lecture theatre, and then he'd suddenly go "Quiet!" in this hugely loud voice, and because it amused him that the first word of Beowulf is "Hwayet," HWAET, which sounds very similar to the English word quiet. And so everybody thought he was shouting at them to be quiet, but actually he was just starting reading out Beowulf. This is the kind of thing that made Tolkien very happy, apparently.
Yeah, very delightful. Oh, that's awesome.
Okay, I think I had another question. Hang on, if I can find it. Oh yeah, Justin Gabbett, just thanking the mods for picking up on the question. They are amazing. You are right. Lyle Hammock again. I don't believe you now when you say that you stopped asking questions. He had to get the spirits from somewhere that he used to bind to creatures. So in your view, where did he get them from? Just out of curiosity. Thank you. Well, so the spirits, he was, I mean, it's worth just sort of unpicking what he can and cannot do. I think what you're trying to get at is, you have a body, you have a spirit, you take the spirit from here and put it into that body. I don't think that's quite how he necessarily did it. So what he did with the orcs was he took an elf and just sort of changed it. What he seems to do with other things is that he has he breeds it in some way. So that's what the word we get with the dragons. So he has a number of different approaches to how he does this. Yes, it's entirely possible that he takes a wolf and then he takes an elf spirit and puts it in there, and then he perverts the elf spirit with his own magic or whatever. That is one way of doing it. To my mind, he could have had other ways. He could have just started with a wolf and then bred wolves that are become werewolves in that sense. So to my mind, that there are a number of ways of doing it.
Dragons are really fascinating because it's said in the Children of Húrin, like the malice of Morgoth is quite evident within Glaurung. And because Morgoth always sought to create his own life, he always sought that element of creation, the secret fire, but he could never find it because it was with Eru and it was with Ea, the known universe. He could never master that. So in my mind, dragons might even just be drones of Morgoth. They might just be him flying those machines almost, and giving them a pseudo sense of willpower, a pseudo sense of just this free will, even though he's at the control panel with these creatures, because he didn't have the flame imperishable. He didn't have that secret fire. It's always a thought that I play with, because that free will determinism thing. Morgoth, Melkor, he didn't have much will, or he didn't have much power over free will. He could curse somebody like Turin, but yeah, I think he was a lot more of a determinist when it came to stuff like his own creations.
Yeah. So I mean, I think, as you probably gathered, we're not told is the short answer to this.
Absolutely.
So we can't categorically say. And what you're suggesting is possible, and so that's I think probably about as far as we can go in terms of sort of categorical stuff. But there are other ways that it could have worked as well. Jules Holman saying, as a healer myself who was inspired by the healing powers of the elves, I'd like to know where their healing comes from, and are all elves able to practice healing? Interesting. So the elves don't get this. What I've always found fascinating: elves don't get sick, and they heal themselves. They heal up really quickly and easily compared to others. So this kind of like powers of healing people is quite a fascinating. When we get a character like Elrond, who we're told has great powers of healing, it's not really necessarily for the elves around him. Its greater use is probably for humans rather than anything else. Mm-hmm. So it kind of adds another little twist on there. Do all elves have powers of healing? I don't know. I'll throw this one to you actually first. Joysten, do you think they all do?
I don't think so. Some are surely much more warriors. Some are scholars. It's just like not all elves are warriors themselves. But certainly, I think your average elf has a better healing capacity than your average human, just because they've been around longer. They kind of know what herbs to find in the wild, things like that. But with Elrond and Galadriel in particular, they also had their elven rings, Vilya and Nenya, the Ring of Air and the Ring of Water, to augment their healing capabilities and their capabilities of renewal. So I think that played into it.
Yeah, and I think the only other thing I would add into this is that elves are a lot more in tune with nature than humans are. And so when Galadriel, there's this great bit when Sam sort of says, "Oh, love your magic, Galadriel," or something to that effect, and she just says, I mean, we don't think of it as much. This is just how we are and what we do. We don't think of it as magic. And that, I think, is really quite important, because you get, for example, when you get the elven bread, lemmus, that has powers to it when you think about it, because it keeps you nourished for a long time, and that is a form of healing, keeping you nourished for an unnaturally long period of time, preventing your body from deteriorating. So that is an example of them understanding how nature works in a way that they would not see as magical, but to other people might be seen as they have got magical powers in that. And I would say probably elves therefore have a better understanding of how nature and the world works, which would allow them to not necessarily have healing powers, but a greater understanding of how healing works.
Yeah,
certainly for themselves, but also I think for others as well. Lyle Hammock just saying thank you for indulging me so much today. You're very welcome.
You asked very interesting questions. That was awesome.
Yeah, I know, excellent ones. Kalkar Snark just picking up Hwayat means listen in Old English, and is the opening line of Beowulf, for which Tolkien's translation is considered the modern standard by many. Yeah, absolutely. I've got 2 more questions from my patrons, so now is probably a good time, if you've got more questions, to drop them into the chat. Mike McFly saying, what do you think about Tolkien's creation story with Middle-earth created by song? Is that the best creation story from a fictional story you've heard? Do you have any other favorites since you love fantasy and other fiction? I will answer this one quite quickly, and then Josten, maybe you have some other sort of favorites from other fiction in terms of, creation stories. I think this probably is my favorite. I love the way that Tolkien and Lewis both had this idea of song. It works so well on so many levels as a mode of sort of creation of something. The sort of the vibrations being the foundation of life works just so perfectly. I did note down a quick quote from the other one that I always remember was from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It's probably slightly less serious thing, which said, "In the beginning, the universe was created. This made many people very angry and has been widely regarded as a bad move," which is just it just always makes me smile. I also particularly like if you're a fan of Terry Pratchett, this probably gives you an insight into my humor with Douglas Adams and Terry Pratchett. But if you go to the very first, The Colour of Magic, the very first Terry Pratchett Discworld novel, they do speculate there about where life came from and why on earth you might have. He addresses straight away the giant turtle in space with 4 elephants on the back of it holding up a disc, and it's saying, what's actually more ridiculous, the idea of 4 elephants holding up a disc, or the idea of an elephant full stop. And yeah, when you think about it, it's probably an elephant itself is quite an astonishing thing. Those kind of things work. I mean, are there any other kind of, maybe slightly more serious, but sort of like creation stories that you, from other literature, that you've appreciated?
Honestly, it's really just the Silmarillion for me. That's like my favorite one, because of how impressionistic and romantic it is. I mean, the Ungoliant is just a pleasure to read. So I would just say Silmarillion.
Excellent. Okay, well, I will at this point. I make your little avatar just disappear, because I want to point at what's behind me. So my last question from my patrons was from Mara Lee, saying, "Do you think that we will see the 2 Trees of Valinor in the new TV show?" Now, this is why I'm showing you this. So, for those who are unaware, if you're watching this, you're probably not unaware, but the Amazon TV show, the amount of information we've had is minuscule. To be fair, they've had it. I mean, they were on an unfair advantage in terms of sort of leaks, in terms of the fact that A, they're on New Zealand, and B, New Zealand was on a massive lockdown. So the chances of information coming out was pretty minuscule. But they have been managing this hugely. And the only thing, the official thing that we've had come out is this, what's behind me now. This is a picture which we get, and this is the only information. They didn't give us any explanation for this. They just said this, and then they told us the date. September the 2nd next year is when it's going to happen. Now, this is fascinating as a picture, because they have told us previously that it's going to be set in the Second Age of Middle-earth. But this picture is not the Second Age of Middle-earth. This picture, as I was saying, hang on, I always get my left and right mixed up on these. There, you may have to sort of squint at it, but when you look hard, those are the 2 trees that we've been talking about here. The fact that the 2 trees are there very, very clearly tells us that this is in the Age of the Trees, which is well before the Second Age. This is in Valinor. This is before Ungoliant came and Morgoth came and ate the trees, effectively killed the trees. So what's going on? Now, we talked about this a lot. I don't know, you may well have even done a live stream or something on this, Joyce, and I didn't, but I'd love your thoughts. But what we've got going on here is clearly something from the Age of the Trees. What you have up here, these mountains, these are the Pelori that we were talking about, the huge mountain range that the Valar put up around Valinor. What we have there is the city of Tirion on a little hill, which we're told is exactly like that. It's white, it's beautiful. It's got this one sort of lighthouse thing just up there with a light. And what is sort of where we are looking at the picture, there is a gap in the Pelori, the mountains, and that is the entrance out into the massive sea on the far side of which you get Middle Earth. There's been huge amounts of conversation about who that figure there might be. My best take is probably Galadriel, but that's purely based not on analyzing what that figure looks like, but who this story is likely to be being told by. So that's a sort of a very much a high level overview. I just love Yoshino. I'm sure you've analyzed this in as much detail as I have. What are your thoughts on what we've got here and how this might fit into the story that we think we're going to be told, to do with the Second Age, to do with Numenor, probably the rings, Sauron, that kind of thing?
I think you're absolutely right in that it's the picture of Galadriel there. And I think this is a flashback to the Years of the Trees, wherein she's going to be a lot more of a main character in the series. I still think predominantly the series will be a Second Age story. But this is telling her backstory, how the trees influenced her. Sorry, that's my dog in the background, if you can hear that.
It's not a problem at all. Mine's gone to bed, so it's all fine here.
My cat and dog are ready for dinner. No, so with this picture, I mean, I think you're right. I think that's Tyrion. I wondered if that was Valmar, but I think that is Tyrion, after all. I believe Galadriel will be a central figure in the show, and I think that this is going to be a flashback for her.
Okay, I mean, I think I would agree with all of that. So, hang on, I was just trying to get you back onto the. There we go. I think I would agree with all of that in terms of. I think maybe not a flashback. What I envisage is something along, and I don't know whether they will do it exactly like this, but when we had the Fellowship of the Ring film, we started with this 5-minute, it was Galadriel doing the voiceover there again.
Yeah.
This 5-minute, here's the history. This is why the ring is important. And then we cut over to the Shire. And I feel if you're going to tell a story about the Second Age, you have to, and where, spoilers, but where the Second Age and the story of Numenor is going to end up with the Numenorians basically trying to get to Valinor, and they're not allowed.
Mm-hmm.
And in order for us to understand that, we have to have seen Valinor to start with. We have to have understood what is it, what's going on, why are they not allowed there in the first place. So that's my kind of take, is to bring people up to so that we understand the stakes, so we understand what's going on. We have this kind of intro, and to say it makes sense with Galadriel, who was obviously around during the Second Age, if she is again our voiceover person who sort of tells us, and she could tell us the story, and this was this wonderful land of Valinor, and I was born here, but then I came across to Middle Earth because, that baddie Morgoth, and Morgoth again, or Melkor, will be another character that we need to sort of understand. He won't make an appearance in the Second Age, but Sauron will be trying to bring people across to Melkor worship. So again, there's a lot of things that I think just concepts, people that need to be introduced. And so I think that's probably what we're seeing here. And I think
I think that would be a great way to open the show if they did it that way. That's awesome.
I mean, I think they're probably laughing their heads off when they thought we've told everyone it's the Second Age. All these geeks are out there expecting a Second Age thing, and then they've, without any explanation, giving us something that is not the Second Age.
That's true. That would be crazy.
I think they must be loving it. Okay, and with that, I think I've come to the end of my Patreon questions. So as I say, now I'm just going to have a quick Robo Steve saying, my horses love the Lord of the Rings movies because horses play such a big role. My dogs, however, aren't fans. Well, I'm sorry to hear that. They should perhaps read a little bit more first age stuff. Huan the dog is the best boy in all literature, I would personally argue. Are they Ella Ave saying, are they filming in Scotland now, no longer in New Zealand? So yeah, they filmed. The filming update is that they, and just for anyone who's wondering where my sort of position is on the, I don't do any spoilers, I don't do any set leaks, anything on this channel. Not judging, there are plenty of other places to get them if you want them, but I don't do that here. So this is a safe place for that. If you just want the official stuff like trailers and stuff, I will definitely be covering. But in terms of sort of filming updates, they filmed it season 1 in New Zealand and they finished that. That's done. They're now doing a year worth of post-production, which it still makes me, I mean, with Game of Thrones, they got up to 8 months maximum.
Yeah. And
that was with dragons and magic and absolutely everything going on. So what they're spending a whole year on, my mind is boggling. This is the
I mean, the show was announced back in 2017, if you can believe it.
Yeah,
it's been a while.
The amount of time they're spending on this is astonishing. Anyway, so they filmed, that is done. Then they've moved, and I'm not going to go into all the reasons why or whatever. You can look for that, but they have moved production to Scotland. They have not started filming season 2 yet, though. That I think they're not going to start that until June, off the top of my head. So there's a break between season 1 filming and season 2 filming. But yes, that will be done in Scotland, which does add up a few sort of continuity issues. But the amount of money they're spending on this, then I'm sure they will be able to get around that. Cloaked One saying, thanks for the great content as always, and thank you so much for your time, Men of the West. Well, I was about to sort of say you're always welcome, but this sounds like it's ending. I was going to give it another couple of minutes just to grab another couple of questions. But we're wishing you both an early Happy Hobbit Day. And early birthday wishes to Dan the dog. Yeah, Dan the dog's birthday is on the Hobbit Day. For those who do not know,
that's awesome.
Reflective Rambling saying, in Deep Geek, can you confirm that your ring is indeed one of the 4 allegedly dragonfire destroyed by dwarven rings, or at least a lesser magic elven? This thing, yeah, this is one of the 9. Don't wish to, just give me enough years, I'll start to fade.
I knew it. I saw that earlier. I knew it. I thought I recognized it somewhere.
Quickly flicking through Mattia Dominique saying, just asking if I understood it correctly, the music writes the world and predicts how everything will play out, which is why only Aru and sometimes Manwë know the entire song, correct? Sort of, yeah. So the music was conducted by Aru. So the music is happening as per his wishes. It was done by the Ainur, who are expressions of his thought. And then after that happened, Melkor was obviously trying to disrupt things as it went along, but Aru said that's all part of the plan anyway, don't worry about it. After all that happened, they were then shown what that means. So it was just a song, and then they were shown what this means. So that means that they each understood their own part more than anything else. So they each understood and cared about their own bit. Yavanna cares about the nature side of things and understands more about that side of things, for example. So that's the way it works. And Manwë was given, now Tolkien, as always, very sort of nuancy about how this works. Manwë was given the breadth, rather than having a specific element of thought, he was given the breadth of Aru Ilúvatar's knowledge or thinking, but not necessarily, that doesn't mean the depth or everything.
Yeah.
Is that your way of understanding it?
Yeah, he of all of the Ainur, he most understood the thinking of Iluvatar, but still not, yeah, absolutely, still not all of it. Eru didn't reveal that to anyone, but definitely different aspects to different folk. Yeah, I find it interesting how Olmo, of all of the Ainur, best understood music, for instance. And because that was in his realm as well. So they all had, yeah, different aspects of the whole. And I even think, even then, if you combined everything that the Valar knew, they still wouldn't be able to say everything that Eru himself knew.
Yeah, I would agree. And the other thing to say there is Melkor is the most powerful, is a thing which we don't hear much. Manwë has the most authority. Melkor is Manwë's brother in Eru's mind, but is more powerful. I think I will end with one final question, just a fun question.
Reflective rambling. I'm sorry about that. That was a squeaky toy. My dog's running around.
Well, I have a question. You can apologize by answering Reflective Rambling's question to round us off. If you and Yoyston were to play a Tolkien Dungeons and Dragons campaign, race and class choice and preferred age to explore, apparently guesses have been placed. So what would you, within Tolkien's world, what would you be?
I would love a first age one, of course, but I think I would have to say perhaps an Angmar War one, mid third age. I would play a paladin human during the fall of Arthedain, during the fall of Arnor, during the Angmar War. I would absolutely love that. How about you?
Well, I that would be fantastic. I think perhaps because I'm just getting excited by the TV show coming, Numenor Second Age stuff.
Yeah.
And I think I would love to be a Numenorian, but I think I would love to be something kind of weird, like a good rogue, the kind who like sneaks in to rescue. So there's lots of rescue missions there, trying to rescue sort of the tree and all the rest of it. That kind of character who's doing sneaky stuff, but the side of good and righteousness. I think that would work really well for me.
Absolutely, I like that.
Okay, well, as we're sort of bringing ourselves to a say, Yoyston, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much,
absolute
Robert.
pleasure. I've been, I'm honoured you're here, and you've been a fantastic guest, sharing your insight. Do you want to just remind people where they can find you, what's coming up, all of the good things about you and yours?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you again for having me. Thank you all so much for watching. You guys can find me at Men of the West on YouTube. If you want to support the channel, I have a Patreon as well, Men of the West. Yeah, thank you so much. I hope to see more of you guys around on some of my future videos here. And Robert, hope to talk to you again soon, especially with our Hobbit Day full YouTube Tolkien family collaboration going on. I'm sure I'll talk to you soon, my friend.
Absolutely. And there is a link down in the description to Men of the West. Do check it out. Excellent stuff. Covering almost every subject that you've ever thought about on Tolkien and a few more going back many, many years. Yoyston is a hero. I'm going to make you disappear for a moment because I'm going to point at a couple of things on the screen. I will be back next week, everyone, with a Game of Thrones live stream and a Song of Ice and Fire live stream. I'm working my way through the history of that as well. We're going to come to the coming of the Andals, I think we're at next week. We've talked about the First Men, the Age of Heroes. Now it all shifts with the coming of the Andals. We don't talk about huge amounts in the history of A Song of Ice and Fire, but this is what ends the First Men being over everywhere. And this is why they have forgotten. The North remembers. No, it doesn't. It's forgotten because the Andals came in. The weirwoods got chopped down. That's next week. If you are watching this back a little bit later on, then appearing somewhere around here, it's going to be a link to some other live streams. Appearing somewhere around here, it's going to be a link to my Patreon, which is the best way to support this channel if you are so inclined. Thank you so much again, Yoyston. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, moderators. Excellent questions today. I've really enjoyed this. We'll be back with another Tolkien live stream in about a month's time. But there were live streams here on this channel every Thursday at the same time. Take care, everyone, and I shall see you again next time.